Just based on your sword technique, I can see that your sword technique is quite good. It's definitely not inferior to mine. But that's just a sword technique that exists for battle, right? Isn't that obvious? Noah said in annoyance. If it doesn't exist for battle, then does it exist for performance? Noah said this casually. However, Gray and Vath nodded in agreement. That's right, it's for performance. Noya immediately stood up, slightly startled. For performance? Is this a joke? If I really learn a sword technique that's used for performance, I'm afraid that I won't be able to kill enough enemies in battle, right? It's not purely for performance. As if she saw through Noah's doubts, Gray and Vath raised the sword in her hand and spoke with a strong and powerful voice. But if you want to unleash the true power of the elves, then it's necessary to have a technique that's both practical and aesthetic. This is the sword dance. Sword dance. Noah first repeated this term, then recalled the knowledge about the sword dance that he read in books. The so-called sword dance was actually the battle technique that Gray and Vath said had both practical and aesthetic value. To be more precise, it was a kind of ritual. The purpose of this ritual was to please the elves. The elves that formed a contract with the elven master also had their own will. Of course, if the elven master was unwilling to lend his power to the elven master, then the elven master wouldn't be able to control the elven master, and might even cause the elven master to lose control. The sword dance existed for this purpose. This kind of battle technique that was both aesthetic and practical could keep the elves in a good mood and unleash their full power while obediently being controlled by the elven master. Not only that, by performing the sword dance to other elves, the other elves could temporarily listen to the elven master's voice and communicate with the elven master, providing all kinds of assistance. Therefore, when the elf users in this world fought, they all used this kind of sword dance, which was both practical and aesthetic. It was said that other than the sword dance, there was also a special kind of ritual music that could achieve different effects through different dances. For example, there was a ritual music that could strengthen the elven master's seal, a ritual music that could give blessings to the elven master, and even a ritual music that could temporarily increase the elven master's strength. There were all kinds of ritual music that could achieve all kinds of effects. Although your sword dance is very powerful, it only exists for battle. It's not good for an elven master if you can't unleash the effects of the sword dance, Gray and Vath explained. Whether it's to unleash the power of the contracted elven master, to hold a large-scale sword dance in a public place, or to communicate with the elves, the sword dance is necessary. In other words, the reason you brought me here is to correct my sword skills. You want my sword skills not only to be used in actual combat, but also to be used as an ornamental sword dance, right? Noah sighed. Alright, my sword dance is indeed more practical. It's not impossible to correct it. Not only that. Gray and Vath directly looked at Noah. I also want to teach you my ultimate sword dance. Ultimate sword dance. Noah's heart skipped a beat. The sword dance just now. That's the initial form of the ultimate sword dance. It's called the purple lightning. Just like what you saw, it's an extremely simple sword dance that uses unparalleled speed to stab. But as long as I use it, my stab will be at least 10 times faster than usual. Gray and Vath said with some pride. Other than the purple lightning, used for stab, my ultimate sword dance also includes body destruction, group annihilation, counter-specific attributes, weapon destruction, counterattack, sword killing, and so on. You've only seen the initial form of the purple lightning. You haven't seen the later ones yet. Hearing this, Noah was more or less moved. It was only the initial form of the ultimate sword dance, but it already had that kind of power. If she used all the ultimate sword dance, then how powerful would it be? It seemed that this Gray and Vath sword dance was even more powerful than he had imagined. Of course, other than the sword dance, you still have a lot of things to learn. For example, you need to learn how to communicate with elves, how to control divine power, how to control elves, and even how to use elven equipment. You need to learn all of these. Gray and Vath poked Noah's forehead with her finger. As a warrior, your strength is indeed quite amazing. But as an elven user, you're still far from it. You don't even have a contract with an elf. You can't even be considered an elven user. There are still a lot of things you need to learn. So, you're my teacher. Noah laughed bitterly, but he also understood. I understand. Whether it's the sword dance or the power of an elven user, if you have anything you can teach me, then feel free to teach me. Hearing this, Gray and Vath smiled. This smile didn't have any part of being a witch. It only had the responsibility of being a teacher. Looking at the smiling Noah, Gray and Vath thought to themselves. This is the second time I'm teaching someone. I hope I can make it in time. Chapter 941. At night, the cold moonlight slowly sprinkled down from the sky, covering the entire elven forest with a faint veil of mystery. Unlike during the day, the night was the time for some rather evil elves to be active. If the elven forest during the day was like a sacred temple, then the elven forest during the night was truly a gloomy place. After all, just like how there were harmless herbivores and harmful carnivores among animals, although most elves from the elemental elf world didn't have the concept of preying on humans, some evil elves would still endanger human lives. They would even gnaw on the flesh of witches and absorb the divine power of elves. They were very dangerous. If they weren't careful, even the most powerful elven user could lose their life in the hands of elves. Therefore, basically, there weren't many people in the elven forest at night. Under such circumstances, Noah, Gray, and Vaz still stayed in the elven forest. At this moment, Noah was standing in the middle of the open space with his eyes closed. His entire body was bathed in the moonlight, and waves of phosphorescent aura undulated around him, making Noah look very sacred. Around Noah, small light particles that looked like fireflies were wandering back and forth. They surrounded Noah's body as if they were dancing. It made people feel like they were in a dream. Keeping his eyes closed, Noah slowly extended one of his hands. Suddenly, those light particles that looked like fireflies were like dancing butterflies. They gathered around Noah's outstretched hand and kept jumping up and down. It was especially beautiful. At this moment, Noah opened his eyes and looked at the large number of light particles that looked like fireflies dancing around his palm. He muttered to himself with uncertainty. In this case, I should have passed, right? Not far from Noah, Gray and Vaz had been watching Noah's actions. After hearing Noah's question, they pushed up their small glasses and nodded. That's right. You can already communicate with elves. It won't be a problem to command these low-level elves. Now, Noah was learning how to communicate with the elves. During the day, Noah would begin to improve his swordsmanship under the guidance of Gray and Vath. Noah's sword skill was already very good, but because it wasn't aesthetically pleasing, it couldn't become a sword dance. Therefore, as long as Noah added some aesthetic elements and made some improvements, not only would these sword skills not lose their original power, but they would also be pleasing to the eye. It was just a slight improvement, so it didn't require much effort. After the improvements were completed, Gray and Vath would teach Noah a sword dance called the Absolute Sword Skill. As for the night, it was the cultivation of the spirit envoys. Just like what Gray and Vath had said, although Noah was powerful, as an elven user, he was just an intern, a rookie among rookies. Noah still didn't know many ways to communicate with elves and how to command them, let alone forming a contract with an elf, having his own contracted elf, and obtaining the power of an elf. In short, now, you will practice sword dance during the day, and practice elven user skills at night. Gray and Vath set Noah's course of study in an unquestionable tone. Although it's already too late for you to learn the abilities of an elven envoy at your age, it's fortunate that you have a strong foundation in the sword dance. As an elven envoy, your talent is also quite high. I believe that it shouldn't be difficult for you to become a powerful elven envoy. Generally speaking, the power of a witch would reach its peak between the age of 10 to 25. After that, it would only continue to decline. Therefore, at the age of 25, the elven users who began to lose their power would consider retiring, and then marry with a pure-blooded noble, leaving the next generation with more perfect elven abilities. Because of this, witches who wanted to become an elven user had to be trained from a young age, and they had to be trained before the age of 10. In terms of age, Noah was much later than those orthodox elven users. To train as an elven user at this age, wouldn't he become a laughingstock if others knew about it? However, Gray and Vath couldn't laugh. This was because this elven envoy with the title of Twilight Witch had personally witnessed Noah, in less than a night's time, complete a cultivation that would take others 1 or 2 years to complete. He had started to communicate with wild elves, and could command low-level elves. In order to reach this level, even Gray and Vath had spent nearly 3 months, but Noah had only spent 3 hours. The gap between them could be seen from this. Originally, as an elven user, learning elven magic is also an important course, but you don't have a contract with an elf, so elven magic is useless to you. Secondly, you don't have that much time, so you can only give up on elven magic. Gray and Vath kept bringing up their ideas. Your true strength lies in the sword dance. As long as you learn how to communicate with elves, establish a contract with them, learn how to summon and control contracted elves, and obtain the elven device, you will become one of the best elven users in this continent. While speaking, Gray and Vath kept explaining the elven user's abilities. Noah listened seriously, and absorbed all of it as if he was thirsty, improving his elven user's abilities little by little. Time flew by quickly. Not long after, the night was over. During the day, the sunlight passed through the heavy branches, leaving countless tiny light spots in the elven forest. It was a beautiful scene. Clang, 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 clang. On the empty ground, 2 figures wielding night swords crossed each other and slashed at each other with lightning-fast slashes. The sound of swords clashing against each other was like a melody, echoing rhythmically above the empty ground. Under Noah's deliberate suppression, Gray and Vath mercilessly launched fierce attacks at Noah. I've discovered that when you're fighting, your improvement is thousands of times faster than usual. With this reason, Gray and Vath violently rushed at Noah like a gust of wind. The pitch-black night sword in her hand turned into a stream of light, and slashed at Noah from all directions. So, if I want you to quickly grasp the knack of the sword dance, there is no better way than fighting. That was indeed the case. Pandora said that as long as there was a battle, the existence called Godslayer could continuously become stronger. This foul physique was successfully found out by Gray and Vath. Therefore, under Gray and Vath's fierce attacks, Noah, who had deliberately suppressed his strength, only displayed his sword skills with a strength that was on par with Gray and Vath's. As if he was blessed with good fortune, he constantly improved his sword skills bit by bit. Over time, Noah's swordsmanship gradually changed from a state where it was only about power and not about appearance to one that took into account both aspects. From afar, Noah looked like he was dancing. The knight's sword in his hand was like a meteor, drawing beautiful arcs in the air. Seeing Noah's figure becoming more and more pleasing to the eye, witnessing Noah's extraordinary speed of improvement, Gray and Vath couldn't help but think while being shocked. Perhaps, I'm making an existence that was originally a monster even more frightening. Just like that, under the guidance of Gray and Vath, Noah's ability and fighting skills as an elven user rapidly improved. 3 days later, Noah completely improved his sword skills, turning them into a true sword dance. At the same time, under the guidance of Gray and Vath, Noah learned the initial form of the ultimate sword skill, Purple Lightning. 7 days later, Noah completed his initial training as an elven user. On that day, Gray and Vath returned to the academy. According to them, they were looking for a high elf that could be contracted for Noah. It wasn't until the 10th day that Gray and Vath returned to the elven forest, interrupting Noah's training. As soon as they appeared in front of Noah, Gray and Vath directly threw out such a sentence. "I found an elf that suits you." Chapter 942. On that day, Noah returned to Alicia Elven Academy, which he had not visited for 10 days, and went to Gray and Vath's office. As soon as he opened the door, a figure entered Noah's sight. It was a woman in her 20s. She had long black hair, wore a pair of black-rimmed glasses, and wore a long-sleeved white shirt. She seemed to be an elven teacher. "Let me introduce you." As soon as she came in, Gray and Vath said directly to Noah. "Her name is Freya Grando. She's the teacher of the Crow class, which gathers the most problematic children in the academy. She's also my right-hand woman. Dean, can you please introduce me in a more normal way?" The female teacher named Freya sighed faintly, but still looked at Noah, brazenly sizing him up. "I've heard about you from the dean. You're the second male elven envoy in history, and you're the dean's disciple, right?" "Excellent disciple." Noah smiled bitterly, but he did not deny it. He nodded directly. "The dean has indeed taught me many things. I hope Teacher Freya can give me some pointers." "I don't really want to give you pointers. After all, you've heard that I'm the teacher of the Crow class, which has the most problematic children." Freya did not deny and went straight to the point. "However, the dean has asked me to help you find an elf that you can contract with, and it must be a high elf that suits you. It's really difficult." As she said that, the teacher named Freya handed a folder to Noah. Noah took the folder from Freya's hands and flipped it open. As soon as he opened it, Noah saw a map. It was a map that indicated the direction to a certain place in the elven forest outside Alicia Elven Academy. "In this place, there's an ancestral hall that worships the elves," Freya said. "And the sealed elves are worshipped there." Sealed elves. Noah was stunned, and then looked at Gray and Vath with some displeasure. "Do you think highly of me? Or do you wish for me to be unlucky?" Noah's words were not without reason. As mentioned before, some of the elves were quite dangerous. That didn't just refer to the evil elves in nature. There was also a type of elf that was also seen as a very dangerous existence. Most of them were extremely powerful, but they would bring disaster to humans. In ancient times, they were even known as terrifying existences like demon gods or ghost gods. Some of these elves were too hot-tempered and would attack humans or even their masters at the slightest provocation. Some of them were unable to control their powers and would often lose control. Due to various reasons, they were sealed away. People especially called this type of sprite the seal sprite. That didn't refer to any particular type of sprite, but to all the dangerous and sealed sprites. Of course, it wasn't as if no one could enslave this kind of spirit. Sealing a sprite was dangerous, but once one had the ability to control it, the sprite user who had formed a contract with it could obtain unimaginable power. In other words, the greater the risk, the greater the reward. Therefore, those who set their eyes on the seal sprite were either people who had an extreme desire for power, or people who were extremely conceited about their abilities as sprite users. But no matter which one it was, once the control of the seal sprite failed, what awaited would be a tragedy. Noah had just become a sprite user for less than half a month, and he had just completed the initial cultivation of a sprite user. Yet, he chose such a dangerous seal sprite as his contract partner. If it was an ordinary sprite user, it would be no different from courting death. "Because it's you, that's why I'm doing this," Gray and Vath said calmly. "After all, although your abilities as a sprite user are still very immature, your own strength is astonishing. Even if the contract fails, you can at least protect yourself. And if the contract succeeds, the benefits will be great. In other words, you want me to try my luck." Noah sighed, but he had no reason to object. After all, since he wanted to form a contract, it was naturally best to form a contract with a powerful sprite. Although a seal sprite was dangerous, it also meant that its strength was enough to threaten. Who wouldn't want to form a contract with such a sprite? I heard from the dean that you're especially good at sword dancing, right? Freya knocked on the folder in Noah's hand. The seal sprite enshrined in this ancestral hall is sealed in a sword, and it is very likely to be a sword sprite. If you can form a contract with a sword sprite, it should be very beneficial for you, who is good at sword dancing. Oh. You've prepared to this extent. Gray and Vaz exclaimed. As expected of you. Dean, don't praise me too early. Freya's expression suddenly became troubled. Although I found the sprite you requested, at the same time, I also attracted a problem. Problem. Gray and Vaz were stunned. Problem. Noah also looked up from the folder in his hand. Freya opened her mouth and was about to say something when there was a knock on the door. Is it here? Freya's expression became even more troubled. Dean, the problem is probably outside the door. Gray and Vaz raised an eyebrow and said directly. Come in. As soon as she said that, the door to the dean's office was opened. Noah turned his head and looked at the door. In the next second, a bright red color entered Noah's vision. It was the color of hair that fell down like a waterfall. A young girl walked in from outside the door. It was a petite girl wearing the uniform of the Alicia Elven Academy. She had a very cute face and looked to be around 14 or 15 years old. However, she had a head of very eye-catching long red hair that was tied into 2 ponytails. The young girl walked into the office with strong steps and looked at Freya, Gray and Vaz, and finally, at Noah. At this moment, Noah saw hostility from the young girl's bright red eyes that were the same color as her hair. It was a hostility that could not be concealed. Of course, it was not malicious, but it was as if she had met a strong competitor. She felt pressured and nervous, and in the end, it became the kind of hostility that could not be concealed. It was this kind of hostility that made Noah blink his eyes, and he was a little confused. You are the male elf that was personally guided by the dean, right? The young girl used a clear voice like a silver bell and directly made such a declaration to Noah. I will never lose to you. Ha! Noah was confused. What was going on this time? On the contrary, Gray and Vaz seemed to understand the young girl's meaning and said to Freya with uncertainty. Could it be? I think it's the same as what you thought, Dean, Freya explained in a troubled manner. Because of the dean's orders, I have been investigating if there are any powerful elves that can be contracted. In the end, I accidentally let Claire Lucio know about it. Hearing Freya's words, even Gray and Vaz frowned and rubbed their temples. This is really an unexpected problem. Seeing Gray, Vaz, and Freya talking in riddles, Noah was almost confused. Now, what was the situation? Although I almost know what is going on, I still want to ask clearly. Gray and Vaz crossed their arms and looked at the young girl in front of them. Claire Lucio, what do you want to do? Dean. The young girl named Claire raised her cute little head and looked at Gray and Vaz without hesitation. She was unusually determined, but her eyes were filled with obsession. I also want to have the opportunity to form a contract with the sealed sword elf. When this sentence came out from the mouth of the young girl named Claire, the reactions of the other 3 were completely different. Gray, Vaz, and Freya looked at each other as if they had expected this. Noah, on the other hand, was slightly startled as he looked at the girl named Claire. Humph, Claire snorted softly and turned her head away. This time, even Noah felt troubled. Things seemed to have become troublesome. Chapter 943. In the tranquil forest, warm sunlight spilled through the gaps between the leaves, illuminating the somewhat gloomy forest. Noah walked slowly towards the depths of the forest, turning a few corners from time to time. Compared to 10 days ago when he had just arrived in the elven forest of this world, his footsteps seemed to have become much more proficient, and he no longer had the tendency to get lost. However, walking on such a forest path, Noah appeared to be somewhat uncomfortable, his gaze constantly sweeping behind him. Stare dash. Behind Noah, at a distance, a petite girl with bright red hair was following him step by step. A pair of fiery red eyes stared intently at Noah, full of vigilance and some curiosity. The reason why Noah felt uncomfortable was that Claire was staring at him from behind. Moreover, ever since they had left the academy, Claire had been staring at Noah in this state, making Noah extremely uncomfortable all the way. Unable to bear it any longer, Noah couldn't help but stop and turn around to look at Claire. "I say, can you stop staring at me like this?" However, just as Noah said this, Claire's expression changed and she started shouting in a panic. "Wah wah! Wah wah! He's talking to me. I'm going to be defiled." This sentence caused the corners of Noah's mouth to twitch. He's looking at me. Claire didn't care about Noah's feelings at all and hid behind a tree in a panic, still crying out in panic. Not good. I'm going to be pregnant." This time, even Noah's eyelids were twitching. Intuition told Noah that if he didn't make things clear here, he would definitely lose something very important. Immediately, Noah rubbed his temples and walked directly in Claire's direction. Claire, who had just poked her head out from behind the tree, happened to see Noah walking towards her. Her cute face stiffened, then she panicked and closed her eyes, crying out in alarm. Don't come over here." The moment she finished speaking, a turbulent wave of air surged out from Claire's body. Clang! At the same time, on the back of one of Claire's hands, a complicated, entirely red engraving lit up. "That's..." Noah stopped. Elven engraving. Elven engraving. That was an engraving that would be branded on a certain part of the elven user's body after forming a contract with an elf. That was the proof of forming a contract with an elf, and also a door that could connect to the elemental elf world. Through this door, the elven envoys could summon the elves who were in the elemental elf world and had formed a contract with them to their side at any time. That was to say, Claire was currently summoning a spirit. Accompanied by the sound of air trembling, a flame suddenly condensed in the palm of Claire's hand with the elven engraving, turning into a long whip burning with flames. It was the elven device. Who? Without any hesitation, Claire fiercely swung the elven device whip in her hand in Noah's direction, causing the long whip burning with flames to turn into a red shadow. Like a sword light flashing through the air, it slashed towards Noah's direction. Noah, who didn't expect Claire to suddenly attack, was stunned on the spot, but his movements didn't have any hesitation. He dodged in a flash. Paw! The long whip burning with flames hit the ground with a crisp sound, leaving a scorched mark. "What's wrong with you?" Noah said in exasperation. "Why did you suddenly attack me? How did I offend you?" Woo! Claire tightly grasped the long whip of flames, staring at Noah with tears in her eyes. Because you definitely want to turn into a wolf and eat me in one bite." Noah only felt a lump in his chest, almost suffocating him to death. It wasn't easy for him to calm it down, as if he was suppressing something, forcing a fake smile. "Can I ask you, why do you have such thoughts?" Don't think you can hide it from me." Claire glared at Noah. "News of what happened to you has long since spread throughout the academy." Hearing this, Noah calmed down. That was true. As early as 10 days ago, Gray and Vaz announced that Noah, a male elven envoy, would be transferring to the Elven Academy. The entire academy, and even the entire Ordesia Empire, received the news. In history, apart from Noah, there was only one other male elven envoy. The Demon King, Solomon. The male elven envoy who had once brought an indelible disaster to this continent. As a male elven envoy like the Demon King, it was natural that he would attract the attention and fear of others. Claire was probably scared too, right? However, just as Noah was thinking and calming down, Claire mustered up her courage and said loudly, "Don't worry, I'm going to kill you. Everyone already knows that as long as a male elven envoy speaks to you, you will be defiled." Noah almost fell to the ground. Also, as long as a male elven envoy looks at you, you will get pregnant. If a male elven envoy comes close, he will turn into a wolf and eat us in one bite. Claire seemed to have seen through the truth and pointed at Noah. "That's why I'm telling you, don't think that you can hide your terrifying ability to corrupt witch just because you've become the Dean's disciple. Even if you defile me, impregnate me, and turn into a wolf to eat me, I will never admit defeat to you." Although she said this, the corners of Claire's eyes were filled with tears. It was as if Noah had spoken to her and looked at her by Noah. She was doomed to depravity and could no longer maintain a pure and sorrowful appearance. Noah suddenly felt like he was an idiot for being so serious with Claire. He felt like he was being treated like a demon king, like an evil person in other people's eyes. Only an idiot would have the idea of being an evil person. Claire's words also let Noah know what kind of existence he was in the eyes of the students of the Elven Academy. As long as he spoke to the girls, he would defile them. As long as he looked at the girls, he would make them pregnant. As long as he got close to the girls, he would transform into a wolf and eat them in one bite. This was the first time Noah knew that he actually had such terrifying abilities that others couldn't help but ridicule him. Just how unworldly were the Magi of Aletheia Elven Academy? No matter how pure they were, how could they view a boy like this? "You win." Noah could only turn around in despair. "Then, if you don't want to be defiled by me, don't want to have my child, and don't want to be eaten by me in one bite, then don't get close to me." After saying this, Noah dragged his heavy footsteps forward. "Wait! Wait!" Claire finally reacted and hurriedly chased after him, shouting as she chased. You defiled me. You actually want to leave." At this moment, Noah was really glad that he was in the elven forest where there weren't many people. If Claire called him that in public, Noah really wouldn't have the face to continue living in this world. According to the map provided by Freya, Noah and Claire passed through the elven forest one after another. After about half an hour, they arrived at a road paved with stone bricks. In front of the road, there was a steep cliff. At the bottom of the cliff, there was a solemn door built with stone bricks. On both sides, there were stone lampposts used for worship. Noah, who was the first to arrive at the door, raised his head and looked at the solemn stone door. Is this the ancestral hall that enshrines the sealed elf of the sword? Relying on his sensing ability, Noah felt that the stone door had no door. It was like the entrance of a tunnel, and there were waves of obscure fluctuations reverberating from it. That was a barrier. Looks like I didn't find the wrong place. Looking at the continuously fluctuating barrier at the entrance of the ancestral hall, Noah's eyes flashed. Let me see what the legendary holy sword that killed the Demon King looks like. Chapter 944. Solomon. The only male elf who was crowned as the Demon King. The existence of this Demon King could be traced back to hundreds of years ago. After hundreds of years, although the Demon King's deeds were still widely spread, most people only treated it as a legend. And there was another person who was passed down along with this legend. Hundreds of years ago, she defeated the Demon King who brought disaster to the continent, and was called the Saintess who saved the world. Alicia Edith. The Saintess who killed the Demon King and saved the continent. The Alicia Elven Academy was named after this Saintess. And the weapon used by the Saintess who saved the world to kill the Demon King was also widely spread as a legend. That was what the world called the sword. Demon Slayer. Some people said that the sword was just an ordinary weapon. There were also people who said that a sword that could kill the demon king that the entire continent was helpless against was definitely not an ordinary weapon. Therefore, the most convincing explanation was that the saintess was also an elf envoy, and the demon slayer she used was the elf magic device transformed from the great elf envoy's elf. No one could give a definite answer as to what the truth was, because it had already become a legend. However, the information that Freya gave Noah mentioned it. The demon slayer was enshrined in the elf forest's ancestral hall. As for whether it was referring to the elf or the sword used to seal the elf, it was unknown. Even whether it was true or not was unknown. Hey, at a place far away from Noah, Claire was still hiding behind a tree. Facing Noah, she was a little anxious and impatient. Do you want to go in or not? If you don't want to go in, then give me the elf. Hearing Claire's words, Noah sighed. Because Claire also requested to form a contract with the elf, the helpless Grey and Vath could only let Noah and Claire compete fairly. After all, this elf was only sealed in the elf forest. It did not belong to the academy, nor did it belong to Grey and Vath. As long as one had the ability, they were qualified to fight for it. It was because of this that Noah and Claire had stepped on the path here together. Don't tell me you don't know how to remove the enchantment? Claire said in dissatisfaction, her voice carrying some anxiety and impatience. If that's the case, then stay away and let me remove it. No need. Noah sighed again. Enchantment or whatever, it has no effect on me. After saying this, Noah directly stepped forward and slammed into the enchantment without doing anything. The enchantment touched by Noah's body began to twist and undulate like a boiling water surface. Then, it suddenly froze. Bang! Like glass being smashed, the enchantment that sealed the entrance of the ancestral hall exploded. Seeing this, Claire's little mouth opened cutely. Ignoring Claire, Noah's footsteps didn't even stop. Under Claire's gaze, he walked into the dark passage. Wait for me. Claire hurriedly chased after him. As soon as he walked into the ancestral hall, a dark and damp passage appeared in front of Noah. In this passage, there was even a musty smell in the air. It was obvious that no one had visited it for a long time. Noah couldn't help but frown, lightly covering his nose and mouth. So smelly, and so dark, Claire, who caught up from behind, also covered her nose and mouth and stretched out a hand. Flames, illuminate the darkness. What came out of Claire's mouth was an incantation that was hard to understand. It was a language called Elven. In the midst of the incantation, a faint divine power surged from Claire's hand and turned into a small fireball, illuminating the surroundings. That was the most elementary flame elven magic. Seeing Claire use the flame elven magic with his own eyes, Noah couldn't help but speak. Since you can use both the flame elven equipment and the flame elven magic, it proves that you have formed a contract with a flame elven, right? Yes. Claire's mind didn't seem to be on Noah anymore. She raised the small fireball in her hand and looked into the depths of the passage as she answered indifferently. Can't I? Since you already have a contract with a spirit, why do you still need to form a contract with the sealed spirit here? Noah asked doubtfully. If I remember correctly, dual contracts should be very difficult to control, right? Simply put, the so-called dual contract was to form a contract with two spirits at the same time. Although there were differences in strength among the spirits, if there were a lot of them, even the weakest strength would become stronger. Moreover, they could also complement each other's weaknesses. However, under normal circumstances, there were almost no benefits to forming a contract with multiple spirits. This was because the contracted spirits would affect each other, causing them to be unable to display their original strength. It could even cause an imbalance in the spirit's divine power and make it impossible to use elven magic. If one didn't have a certain amount of talent, it would be impossible to control multiple spirits at the same time. It was already very difficult to control a double contract, let alone a contract that was more than double. Even Gray and Vaz had only formed a contract with one spirit. One could imagine how difficult it was. Not to mention, sealed spirits were very difficult to control in the first place. Adding on the fact that it was a dual contract, it really wasn't wise. In response, Claire's fiery red eyes began to flicker as she spoke in a low voice. She said in a low voice, "I must obtain a powerful spirit, one that won't lose to anyone." Leaving only this sentence, Claire no longer paid attention to Noah and walked into the depths of the passage. Looking at Claire's slender back, Noah scratched his cheek. "Really? No matter where I go, I can meet people with stories." Passing through the tunnel-like passage, Noah and Claire silently reached the depths and finally saw the ancestral hall at the end of the passage. It was surrounded by rock walls. In the vast open space of the ancestral hall, there was a path made of stone. And at the very front of the ancestral hall, there was an altar. On the altar, there was a sword engraved with very delicate patterns. The entire sword was emitting a faint arc of light. It looked like it had been there for a long time, but it didn't have any wear or tear. It was inserted upside down on a stone platform that had been carefully polished, rendering the atmosphere extremely sacred. Gazing at the sword, Noah and Claire glanced at each other. "I heard that most of the sealed elves are sealed in famous weapons or props, right?" Noah asked. "Let's not talk about whether that sword is the holy sword that killed the demon king. The sealed spirit we're looking for is undoubtedly sealed in that sword, right?" "That's right." Claire stared closely at the sword, some nervousness appearing in her eyes, but more of it was unswerving determination. "No matter what spirit it is, I must make it obediently become mine." From Claire's words, Noah heard a sense of mission. Then, Claire dispelled the fireball in her hand and looked straight ahead, speaking to Noah. "If you don't plan to make a move, then let me go first." "Gray, Vaz also said that we will compete fairly," Noah said indifferently. "You go first. If you fail, it's my turn." "Don't worry." Claire took a deep breath. "There's no place for you to fight here." After saying that, Claire stepped forward and walked with powerful steps to the altar. The surroundings were deathly silent. Under Noah's gaze, Claire reached out her hand and tightly grasped the hilt of the sword in front of her, closing her eyes. "Proud spirit sealed in the ancient holy sword, you shall serve me as your master and form a contract, then I shall be your scabbard." When the elven incantation flowed out of Claire's mouth like a song, the holy sword hilt in Claire's tightly gripped hand started to blossom with light. Whing! Suddenly, within the vast ancestral hall, a gust of wind swept out in all directions with the altar as the center without any warning. Chapter 945. Whoosh! An astonishing gale swept back and forth in the ancestral hall. Like a powerful storm, it blew in all directions, causing sand and dust to fly up. Noah, who was standing at the entrance of the passage, raised a hand in front of him. He looked at the sword on the altar that Claire was holding tightly. Its entire body was radiating light, and it even set off waves of wind. His expression was a bit surprised. What astonishing divine might! The spirit sealed in that sword is definitely not an ordinary spirit. After understanding this, Noah started to worry. Can that girl successfully form a contract with such a spirit? Noah wasn't worried that Claire would steal his powerful spirit. Rather, he was worried that with Claire's ability, if she failed to form a contract, she would be injured by the runaway spirit. Recalling Claire's resolute gaze filled with a sense of mission, Noah could only smile bitterly. I hope that girl doesn't act recklessly. Unfortunately, things didn't develop as Noah expected. Goo! Claire, who was tightly holding the sword, let out a small, bitter groan. She could only feel the enormous divine might from the sword rushing through her body like a substantial attack. I command thee to form a contract with me. Even so, Claire still didn't loosen her grip on the sword hilt. Instead, she gripped it tighter and tighter. Waves of divine power began to fluctuate in her hand, pouring it into the sword in an attempt to communicate with the spirit sealed within. At this moment, the sword in Claire's hand trembled violently. Suddenly, it blossomed with an astonishing light, bursting forth with a powerful impact. Bang! With a muffled sound, Claire's petite body was directly sent flying by the impact from the sword. Ah! Immediately, the young girl's scream echoed in the ancestral hall. Whoosh! Almost at the same time, a figure leapt into the air and caught Claire, who was flying backwards. Then, with a powerful kick to the wall, the figure spun around and landed steadily on the ground. Moreover, it was in the form of a Princess Carrie. Claire, who was prepared to receive the impact, opened her eyes. Then, her face flushed red. You. What about you? Noah rolled his eyes. If you want to thank me, wait until after the matter is over. What do you mean after the matter? You beast. Claire's face was red. With tears in her eyes, she pounded Noah's chest with her small fists. You finally revealed your true nature. Are you preparing to turn into a wolf and eat me? What kind of circuit is in your head to have such thoughts? Noah almost collapsed. Is this the time to care about this? Wah. Are you saying that my purity isn't something I need to care about? No one said that, right? Release me. Beast. Pervert. Woo. Are you really going to hit me? Just as Noah and Claire were wrestling, a ray of light suddenly shot out from the dazzling altar in front of them. It cut through the air and shot toward Noah and Claire with a sharp sound of wind. Claire, who didn't notice this scene, was still pounding on Noah's chest with a red face. She struggled and shouted at the same time. Noah, however, noticed this. He could only ignore Claire's pounding and struggling. With a step, his figure nimbly dodged to the side. Whoosh! With a sharp sound of wind, the ray of light shot past Noah and Claire's original position and landed in the air. It drew a beautiful arc and rose into the air. At this time, the main body of the ray of light was finally revealed. It was a sword. It was shining with dazzling light. Its appearance was extremely luxurious and looked very gorgeous. That's the spirit sealed in the sword just now. Claire finally stopped her unreasonable tantrum and looked nervously at the steel sword floating in the air. It really is a sword spirit of the steel attribute. Besides, it isn't an ordinary sword spirit. Noah gazed at the steel sword that was emanating a dazzling radiance. You can feel it, right? There's a very powerful force in that sword. Elves were also divided into different levels. Under normal circumstances, from low to high, the elves in the elemental world could be divided into low, middle, and high levels, a total of 3 levels. However, elves of the same level had an extremely obvious difference in strength. And this sword in front of them, from the divine might and pressure it released, didn't look like an ordinary spirit. It has to be at least a high-level spirit. Noah's eyes flashed. And it has to be one of the top high-level spirits. It seems that your contract failed. Not only was the spirit sealed in the sword released, but it also seems to have entered a state of losing control. Noah gently placed Claire on the ground and patted her little head. Since you failed, it's my turn now. After saying that, Noah was about to step forward, but Claire hurriedly grabbed his sleeve and said excitedly. Who said I failed? I'm just about to start. Hey. Noah narrowed his eyes and cast his gaze on Claire. Are you still going to force yourself? That's none of your business. Claire lowered her head and bit her lip. I must obtain a powerful spirit, one that won't lose to anyone. After saying this, Claire took a step forward, her fiery red eyes staring unwaveringly at the steel sword floating in the air. Be obedient and become mine. Sword spirit. A vigorous divine aura turned into a wave of air and rose from Claire's petite body. Guardian of the red flames, the hearth keeper who never sleeps, the spirit imprint on the back of Claire's hand flashed with intense red light. Here, fulfill the blood contract and listen to my orders. The valiant divine might and the blazing red elven imprint entwined tightly together, setting off surging flames that landed on Claire's palm. Let's go. Claire yelled and threw the burning flame in her hand fiercely. Scarlet. The scorching flame thrown into the air by Claire directly exploded and turned into a cat. It was a fire cat with a red body and burning flames all over. That was the flame spirit that Claire had formed a contract with. Noah was a little surprised when he sensed the divine might and temperature leaking out of the air. It's also a high-level spirit. Open your eyes and look carefully, male spirit. Claire's pretty face brimmed with a confident smile. I, Claire Lucio, am not as weak as you think. The moment he finished speaking, the fire elemental cat named Scarlet showed its true form in midair. It roared fiercely and pounced on the steel sword in midair with a scorching flame. When Scarlet rushed into the air, the steel sword suspended in the air suddenly shook and turned into a gorgeous sword light that shot out. The steel sword was extremely fast, so fast that one could barely see a sword light flash through the air. However, just as the steel sword was about to touch Scarlet's body, Scarlet let out a ferocious roar. The scorching flame surrounding the surface of his body suddenly expanded and gathered on a small claw. Immediately, Scarlet's sharp claws tore through the air, bringing with them an astonishingly high temperature as they collided with the steel sword that was shooting towards him. Clang! Following the sound of steel colliding with steel, a burst of sparks poured down from the air like raindrops. Then, the sharp steel sword spun and flew out of the scorching flames as if it had been knocked away. Success! Claire let out a cry of joy. However, Noah subconsciously felt that something was wrong and hurriedly called out. No! That's not the sword spirit's full strength. Before he could finish speaking, the sharp steel sword suddenly paused and suddenly erupted with a terrifying divine aura. It flashed out like lightning. Poochie! In the next second, the steel sword pierced through the fire cat spirit's body. Chapter 946. Poochie. When the sharp steel sword flashed out like lightning and directly penetrated the body of the fire cat sprite named Scarlet, the fire cat sprite let out a mournful cry and fell from the sky. Scarlet. Claire also let out a mournful cry and desperately ran in the direction of the fire cat sprite that had fallen. However, at this moment, the sharp steel sword that had penetrated the fire cat sprite's body turned and pointed its tip at Claire's back as she ran in the direction of Scarlet. Whoosh! The next moment, the sharp steel sword that had turned into an arrow once again cut through the space and descended from the sky, rapidly shooting towards Claire's back. However, the sharp steel sword that was mercilessly shooting in the direction of Claire did not notice. At the same time, Noah's figure suddenly appeared in midair. His dark and deep eyes flashed with a brilliant light, and he suddenly flicked his hand. Paw! With a crisp sound, Noah tightly grasped the hilt of the sharp steel sword in his hand. Buzz 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 buzz. The sharp steel sword suddenly vibrated crazily. On it, a powerful divine power transformed into a substantial impact that repeatedly shook Noah's hand that was tightly grasping the sword hilt. However, not only did Noah not let go, but he also raised the sharp steel sword in his hand and pointed it upwards. He gripped the hilt so tightly that blue veins popped out. Suddenly, Noah's LV, fourth strength, forcibly stopped the crazy vibration of the sharp steel sword. Buzz! At the same time, an incomparably fierce divine power shook from Noah's hand that was tightly grasping the sword hilt. Like a stormy sea, it continuously poured into the sharp steel sword. As a result, the divine power that was more turbulent than the sharp steel sword actually pushed back the divine power that was repeatedly shaking the sword toward Noah. Buzz, 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 buzz. As if really enraged, the sharp steel sword erupted with even more ferocious divine power amidst the vibrations in the air and space. It turned into an impact that shook the divine power that was attacking Noah. Boom! Thus, the two incomparably terrifying divine powers collided with each other using the sword as a bridge. It was as if an invisible bomb had been detonated, stirring up an astonishing shockwave that spread in all directions. It's a lie, right? Claire, who was hugging the dying fire cat sprite, tried her best to stabilize her footsteps. Her fiery red hair fluttered wildly in the wind, but it still could not conceal the shock in Claire's eyes. How can that male sprite's divine power be so strong? Little did she know that Noah was also in surprise. However, what surprised Noah was not the strength of the sprite's divine power, but the strength of the sword sprite's divine power. There's actually a way to be a pure energy that is equal to mine. One must know that Noah had an unlimited source of magic power. And when the source of magic power was transformed into a source of divine power or a source of divine power, the magic power within would not be depleted in the slightest. In other words, the amount of divine power in Noah's source of magic power would be the same when it was transformed into a source of divine power or a source of divine power. In other words, Noah's divine power could also be said to be unlimited. Of course, while divine power was unlimited, Noah himself was limited. If he used more magic power, divine power than his body could handle in one go, then Noah's body would definitely be damaged. Simply put, the water in the reservoir was unlimited, but the water pipes that could extract water from the reservoir were limited. In terms of power output, the amount of divine power that Noah could use in one go was not truly unlimited. However, even so, the amount of divine power that Noah was using now was more than 100 times, or even 1,000 times more than that of an ordinary sprite. Under such circumstances, the sword sprite's divine power was actually able to compete with Noah's divine power, which really surprised Noah. But that's it. At the center of the shock waves caused by the collision of divine power, Noah held the sharp steel that was constantly vibrating and his eyes focused. Even if the capacity of the water pipes is the same, the amount of water stored in the reservoir is different. Your divine power will be exhausted sooner or later, but my divine power is almost endless. After all, the amount of divine power that Noah could use in one go was not even a billionth of the total amount of divine power in the source of divine power. If he continued to use this amount of power, the sword sprite's divine power would be exhausted sooner or later. If Noah wanted to exhaust his divine power, it might be an exaggeration to say that he would exhaust it until the end of time, but it was definitely enough to exhaust it until he was old. In fact, the divine power that was continuously vibrating from the sharp steel sword was indeed gradually weakening. With an almost unlimited source of divine might as a backup, Noah's divine might continued to pour into the razor-sharp steel sword with the greatest amount of power. Over time, the sharp steel sword was starting to be unable to support itself. Just as Noah confirmed his victory, the sharp steel sword suddenly trembled and blossomed with a frightening light that covered Noah's palm. Gotcha! In the next moment, a voice that sounded like ice was condensed rang out faintly. However, what condensed wasn't ice, but Noah's hand. Moreover, what condensed in Noah's hand wasn't ice, but heavy steel. Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. Noah's hand that was tightly gripping the sword hilt was constantly covered by the heavy steel amidst the congealing sounds. His entire hand became heavy. Not good. Claire cried out in alarm. That sword sprite is starting to use elven magic. This tempering phenomenon was one of the elven magic spells that the sword sprite with the steel attribute could use. Knowing that it couldn't compete with Noah in terms of divine power and that it couldn't break free from Noah's LV, for strength, ability, the sharp steel sword could only choose to use elven magic to attack Noah. In response, Noah only sneered. The tempering phenomenon that was spreading on Noah's arms suddenly stopped. Bang! Not long after, the steel that was climbing on Noah's arm shattered, turning into steel pieces that fell to the ground. Seeing this scene, Claire was stunned. Even the sword sprite that was constantly vibrating stopped for a moment and stopped vibrating. "Sorry, magic doesn't work on me," Noah said indifferently. "Not only can my body reflect all magic, but it is also immune to all kinds of negative powers. Whether you are tempering, petrifying, weakening, poisoning, or even cursing, it doesn't work on me." When these words came out of Noah's mouth, the sharp steel sword that was desperately vibrating suddenly stopped and became motionless. Noah was startled, and then his eyes lit up. Good chance. After saying this, Noah closed his eyes and poured the greatest amount of divine power into the steel sword in his hand. "Arrogant sprite sealed in the ancient holy sword, you should serve me as your master and form a contract, then I will be your scabbard." The incomprehensible elven spell turned into the most pleasing words, echoing in the vast ancestral hall. "I command you, form a contract with me." At this moment, the sharp steel sword's whole body was flowing with dazzling light. However, this light wasn't as dazzling as before, but was rather gorgeous and gentle. The sharp steel sword trembled slightly, but no longer struggled. It slowly accepted the divine power flowing from Noah's body, and its own divine power intertwined with Noah's divine power, fusing together. After an unknown amount of time, on the back of Noah's left hand that was holding the sword, there seemed to be several swords crisscrossing, forming an extremely complicated pattern. That was naturally the elven mark. The most direct proof of forming a contract with the sprite. The moment the elven mark appeared, the sharp steel sword in Noah's hand slowly turned into a shadow. When everything calmed down, whether it was the steel sword, the light, or the wind, they all dissipated in the air, disappearing without a trace. The whole place returned to silence. Claire, who had witnessed this scene with her own eyes, hugged Scarlet tightly and murmured, "That's right. It's really done." Noah, on the other hand, was still holding his sword tightly. He looked at the elven mark on the back of his left hand, and his eyes flickered. Only Noah knew. In the final moment, it wasn't that the sword sprite was conquered, but that it chose to accept the contract. Chapter 947. Alessia Elven Academy, the Dean's office. Sitting behind the luxurious desk, Grey Vath raised her head and looked forward. As far as Grey Vath could see, the two of them stood some distance apart. It was Noah and Claire who had just returned from the elven forest. Grey Vath glanced at the elven mark on the back of Noah's left hand and smiled. "Looks like things went quite smoothly. Successful." Noah raised his hand that was branded with the elven mark, and said in a self-deprecating manner, "If you saw how unreasonable that wild elf was at the scene, I wonder if you would still have such thoughts. Isn't it fine as long as the result is smooth?" Grey Vath said nonchalantly. "You should be satisfied to be able to successfully form a contract with such a high-level elf." After speaking, Gravath no longer paid attention to Noah. Instead, she looked at Claire, who had been keeping her head down the entire time, and said meaningfully, "I think a little failure is a good thing for you. What do you think?" Claire bit her lips and glared at Noah with her fiery red eyes. She looked like she had a deep grudge against him and even pointed a finger at Noah. "You only formed a contract with a wild elf from who knows where. That doesn't mean I lost to you." Noah felt a headache coming on. "I didn't say I wanted to compete with you, did I? This kind of thing is a test of luck, isn't it?" As mentioned before, elves also had their own wills. Although Witch-G would be able to communicate with fairies as long as she was pure and untainted, forming a contract was another matter altogether. Elves had the right to choose the master they liked. Therefore, even if an elven user's abilities were lower, as long as they had a deep emotional foundation with the elf, they could sometimes form a contract with a high-level elf. Therefore, Forming a contract with an elf would not only test the elven user's abilities, but also the compatibility. When they were in the ancestral hall, the sealed sword elf was obviously very resistant to Claire. As for Noah, the sword elf was resistant at first, but for some reason, it suddenly compromised. Maybe I just happened to get along well with that sword elf. Noah shrugged. Maybe it felt that you weren't suitable for it, so it refused to form a contract with you. That's also possible, right? What do you mean by that? Claire was furious. You want to say that I have a bad temper and the elf hates me, right? I didn't say that. Noah looked at Claire with ridicule. If you mind, I can help you ask that sword sprite. While saying this, Noah deliberately waved his hand with the elven mark in front of Claire with a spurious smile. Claire's petite body began to tremble. Just when Noah thought that he had angered Claire, tears suddenly welled up in the corners of Claire's eyes. Undoubtedly, you defiled me and almost made me pregnant. In the elven forest, you even planned to turn into a wolf and eat me in one bite. Now you're saying such irresponsible words. Claire shouted at Noah. I hate you the most. Leaving these words behind, Claire ran out of the office with tears streaming down her face like a woman who had been abandoned. Noah was completely frozen in place. He couldn't even move. Oh. Gray and Vath looked at Noah with bone-chilling eyes. So you did that kind of thing. Seeing the bone-chilling coldness in Gray and Vath's eyes, Noah's mouth twitched. He took a deep breath and spoke in a deep voice. If I say that things aren't what you think, will you believe me? Believe, of course I believe you. After all, you were invited by me to study in this academy. You didn't come here with bad intentions, right? Gray and Vath smiled sweetly, but there was no smile in her eyes. I just hope that you can move around in front of me as much as possible. That way, I will feel more at ease. Do you understand? Noah raised his head and looked at the ceiling, speechless. Elven forest, open space. Noah and Gray and Vath walked out of Elven Academy and stood facing each other, bathing in the warm sunlight. Looking carefully, Gray and Vath were explaining something to Noah without stopping. In short, if you want to summon your own contracted spirit, you must first focus your will on the proof of the contract with the spirit, which is the spirit mark. Then, you must use an exclusive spirit summoning incantation, which is the so-called contract method. Through the connection with the spirit in the elemental spirit world, you can open a circuit to the elemental spirit world. Then, you can summon your contracted spirit. Gray and Vath explained attentively, which was rare. As for the contract method, you just need to focus your will on the spirit mark, and you should be able to get it. Noah nodded, indicating that he understood. Gray and Vath took a step back. I've already taught you the specific method. Now, you can try to summon your contracted spirit. Noah nodded silently again. He raised his left hand that was engraved with the elven seal and closed his eyes. Wang. Some divine power flowed out from the nearly infinite divine power source in Noah's body and flowed to Noah's arm. Then, it passed through Noah's arm and poured into the spirit mark. Noah followed the method taught by Gray and Vath and focused his will on the spirit mark on the back of his left hand. It was like sinking his consciousness into a crystal-clear lake. His will continued to concentrate. This process lasted for who knows how long. Until a certain moment, Noah suddenly felt a flash of inspiration in his heart, causing him to open his mouth slightly as though he was blessed with good fortune. Then, he chanted the elven language that turned into a spell. Cold Steel Queen, holy sword that slays demons and demons, turn into a sword of steel and bestow me with divine power. The melodious elven incantation echoed in the air, accompanied by a surge of divine power that spread in all directions. Clank. Suddenly, the faint spirit mark on the back of Noah's left hand lit up. Noah could feel it. At this moment, the elven seal in his hand, with the help of Noah's divine power, built a passage that extended into the void and spread to another world that coexisted with this world. Not long after, as if a door leading to another world had been opened, the passage built from the elven mark connected with a brand new world, forming a loop. However, at this moment, the light that bloomed from Noah's spirit mark paused. Bang! Without any warning, the light that flashed from the spirit mark on the back of Noah's hand suddenly shattered like a ceramic that fell to the ground. Immediately after, the circuit that was connected to the elemental fairies' world also disappeared. Noah abruptly opened his eyes and stood up in surprise. What's going on? What's going on? Gray and Vath also rushed forward and frowned. Did something happen? No, it's nothing. Noah shook his head and stared at the spirit mark on the back of his left hand. He also frowned. It's just that, for some reason, after the circuit was built, there was a problem with the summoning. A problem with the summoning. Gray and Vath's frown deepened. In other words, you can't summon a contracted spirit. I don't know. Noah clenched his left hand that had the spirit mark on it. His eyes flickered slightly. Instead of saying that I can't summon a contracted spirit, it's more like the contracted spirit can't respond to my summoning. The contracted spirit can't respond to your summoning. Gray and Vath pondered. Could it be that there's a problem with that spirit in the elemental world of spirits? That's why I don't know. Noah raised his head and looked at Gray and Vath. I'm just a newbie who just started learning the skills of elven summoning. If you don't know, it's even more impossible for me to know. That's true. Gray and Vath smiled bitterly. For now, let's observe the situation first. Hearing this, Noah could only nod helplessly. Chapter 948. It was nighttime. In the elven forest that had turned dark and gloomy, Noah held a sharp long sword in his hand and slowly drew a pattern on the ground. It was a simple magic circle. To be more precise, it was a simple magic circle that wasn't too complicated, but was very delicate and detailed. After directly carving this magic circle on the ground with his sword, Noah casually threw away the sharp long sword in his hand and allowed it to be swallowed by the sudden fluctuation of golden ripples. Then, he stood in the center of the magic circle. Taking a deep breath, Noah closed his eyes and extended his hand that was engraved with the elven mark. Cold Steel Queen, holy sword that slays demons and demons, turn into a sword of steel and bestow me with divine power, contract form. Elves needed to use the elven incantation when summoning their contracted elves. Just like humans, although they were collectively called humans, they couldn't become the same existence. The same principle applied to every single elf. Therefore, after forming a contract with a sprite, the sprite incantation required for each contract sprite to be summoned, which was the form of the contract, was different. Now, Noah was chanting the contract form that belonged to his contracted elf. Clang! Just like during the day, the moment Noah's contract form was cast, the elven mark that was branded on Noah's left hand bloomed with dazzling light. At the same time, the magic circle carved on the ground also shone, illuminating the entire dark space. Between the surrounding trees and bushes, evil elves that were hiding and preparing to do something bad to Noah were frightened by the sudden light. One by one, they fled in panic and disappeared in an instant. Noah stood in the center of the dazzling magic circle and tried his best to imbue the elven mark in his hand with divine power. He tried to use this door that could connect to the elemental elf world at any time and summon his contracted elf. Unfortunately, things didn't go as he wished. Just like during the day, the light that bloomed from Noah's elven mark suddenly froze. Bang! With a clear cracking sound, the light shattered like glass, turning into light particles that dissipated into the air. On the ground, the dazzling magic array gradually dimmed until it completely disappeared. Noah slowly opened his eyes. He stared at the elven mark on the back of his hand and sighed. It still doesn't work. Because the summoning during the day had failed, Noah planned to use the help of the magic array to open the circuit to the elemental sprite world more smoothly and summon the contracted sprites. Generally, this method of summoning contracted sprites with the help of magic square matrices was used by those who had just concluded a contract with sprites and were unable to act independently. It could make it easier for immature sprite users to summon contracted sprites. Originally, Gray and Vath thought that with Noah's talent, even if he had just contracted a sprite, he didn't need to install 2 small wheels on the back to avoid falling down like a child learning how to ride a bicycle. Who would have thought that the summoning would fail? Noah had no choice but to use this method, which was similar to installing 2 small wheels on the rear wheel of a bicycle to avoid falling down, to summon the elves. If this still doesn't work, then I guess there's really no other way. Noah gently stroked the elven mark on the back of his hand and fell into deep thought. Why is that so? In fact, it wasn't rare for sprite users to be unable to summon contracted sprites in this world. Because only the pure witch concubine could communicate with sprites, if one's body was tainted, then it was natural for one to be unable to summon sprites suddenly. Apart from that, for example, breaking the oath of the contract, causing one to be unable to communicate with sprites due to mental trauma, would also cause sprite users to be unable to summon sprites. In short, the matter of communicating with sprites was closely related to the sprite user's mental state. Noah wasn't a pure witch concubine to begin with. He was an exception to the rule of male sprite users. Naturally, there was no such thing as his body being tainted, losing his purity, and being unable to communicate with sprites. Therefore, this possibility could be ruled out first. Breaking the oath of the contract, or having mental trauma, had never happened to Noah before. Then, the only possibility was that the problem didn't lie with Noah, the sprite user, but with the sprite he was contracted with. Is it not willing to respond to my summoning? Or is it unable to respond to my summoning? Noah couldn't figure it out and could only give up on thinking about it. Forget it, let nature take its course. Looking at the magic formation engraved on the ground, Noah walked out of the open space and headed in the direction of Alicia Elven Academy. Ever since he came to this world, Noah had spent nearly half a month in the Elven Forest. The reason for this was that no one would disturb him in the Elven Forest, allowing Noah to focus on his training as a sprite user. Secondly, the Elven Academy was filled with pure witch concubines. There was no male dormitory, so Noah could only spend half a month in the Elven Forest. And in this half a month, Gray and Vaz had taught Noah almost everything they needed to teach. Now, all that was left was for Noah to learn and practice. Only then did Greyvath, who felt as if she had been relieved of a huge responsibility, remember the problem of Noah's residence and began to make arrangements. She said she would solve this problem, but why do I have a bad premonition? In the courtyard of the Elven Academy, Noah leaned against a lamppost and scratched his face. I hope that witch didn't trick me. However, for Noah, it seemed that today was destined not to be a smooth day. The male sprite user over there. Suddenly, an awe-inspiring voice rang out beside Noah. Noah turned his head and looked over. Then, as if he didn't want to see anyone, he covered his face. What is the meaning of this? You rude guy. A slightly angry voice told Noah that even if he didn't see it, it wouldn't become an illusion. At that moment, Noah could only raise his head and look over with narrowed eyes. Not too far away from Noah, a ponytailed girl was looking at Noah with displeasure. She was wearing a pure white uniform and a knight's sword in its scabbard at her waist. She was wearing a small amount of light clothing. Alice Farangelto. She was the leader of the Wind King Knights who was in charge of law and order in the Elven Academy. This girl, who didn't have a good impression of Noah when they first met, had her cute face tense. She stared at Noah as if he wasn't a classmate, but a criminal who was about to commit a crime. She was full of vigilance. Noah didn't know how many times he sighed today. His face was full of bitterness. As expected, the ominous premonition was right. What are you mumbling about? Alice raised her eyebrows. Then, she thought of something and widened her eyes. She gripped the hilt of the knight's sword at her waist tightly. Could it be that you're really like what the girls in the academy said? That you know some incantation that can lure innocent girls to bed? Who knows that kind of incantation? Noah couldn't help but ridicule. If there really is such an incantation, then all the girls will be done for, right? Wah! What? Alice was shocked and her face turned fierce. You still plan to use such despicable methods to conquer all the girls on this continent? Shameless! I won't let you get away with it. After saying that, Alice immediately wanted to draw her sword, but Noah's face twitched, and he put on a fake smile. Let's not talk about the structure of your brain for you to have such thoughts. But let me say this first. If you make a move, I'll tie you up again and hang you in front of the academy's door. Tomorrow, all the students in the academy will come and admire the majestic figure of the leader of the knights. Alice's hand froze, and she bit her lip, looking indignant. You actually dare to threaten me? You are indeed an evil man. Noah wanted to cry but had no tears. Why did it become like this? Chapter 949. Thud. 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 It was late at night in the Elven Academy. Clear and crisp footsteps reverberated back and forth in the square and courtyard. Coupled with the gloomy atmosphere in the surroundings, it made one's hair stand on end. However, the one who made such footsteps wasn't a ghostly elf, but a beautiful young lady. With her long, dark blue hair tied into a ponytail, the leader of the Wind King Knights, Alice, walked in a certain direction with seemingly hurried steps with a stern expression. Of course, Noah, who was walking behind Alice, couldn't see the expression of the leader of the Wind King Knights. He merely walked a short distance behind Alice with a helpless expression. Why are you in charge of leading the way for me? Although he didn't know what kind of residence Gray and Vaz had prepared for him, Noah, who had lived like a savage in the deep mountains for 4 years, shouldn't be concerned about it. What Noah was more concerned about was why this old-fashioned and strict leader of the Wind King Knights was in charge of leading the way for him. It was impossible that Gray and Vaz didn't know that Alice didn't like this male elf, Noah, right? It should be said that not only Alice, but all the elven envoys in the Elven Academy had no immunity to men. In fact, most of the elven envoys outside the academy were very pure. It was only natural that they would be so concerned about and even afraid of a man. And from Alice's behavior, it could be seen that this lass was also a standard innocent young lady. However, as the leader of the Wind King Knights who managed the security and order of the academy, Alice still chose to stand out and protect the students in the academy even though she didn't like Noah, a male elf. In the end, due to the conflict between her excessive awareness and her duty, Alice should hate Noah more than anyone else in the academy. Why would she still lead the way for Noah in the middle of the night? Noah could only think of Gray and Vaz's arrangement. Unfortunately, it really wasn't Gray and Vaz's arrangement this time. I volunteered to lead the way for you, and even took care of the matter of your residence. Alice spat out some merciless words without even turning her head. Do you have any objections? It's not an opinion. Noah shrugged. I'm just curious as to why you would pay attention to a male elven envoy like me who might destroy the discipline and order of the academy. Of course I should be the one to do this, shouldn't I? Alice said firmly. If it was another student who was leading the way for you and was attacked by you, what would you do? Attack? Noah was speechless. Just because of this reason? Of course not. Alice snorted. I still have to personally watch your every move. In other words. Noah rubbed his temples. This is surveillance, right? That's right, Alice admitted bluntly. Everyone in the academy said that you didn't see anyone during the day, so you must be planning to hunt at night. Hunt? Noah blinked. What hunt? Do you even need to say it? Alice said without hesitation. Isn't it just hunting females? Noah's eyelids twitched. He resisted the urge to beat his chest and forced out such a question. Allow me to ask, since I entered the academy, what kind of rumors have been spreading about me? Noah learned from Claire that there were rumors about him circulating in the academy. For example, as long as he talked to a witch G, he could taint her. As long as he looked at a witch G, he could make her pregnant. For example, as long as he got close to witch G, he would transform into a wolf and devour her in a single bite. Alice also said that there were rumors in the academy that Noah knew how to seduce young girls into bed. Now, with the addition of the rumors about him coming out in the middle of the night to hunt young girls, Noah really didn't know what kind of rumors had been spreading about him. Do you think no one knows about all the good things you've done? Upon hearing Noah's question, Alice snorted disdainfully as she spoke. For example, you forced yourself on the dean and had something on her, threatening her to let you study here. Another example is that you've been in the elven forest every day to find pure elves to form contracts with. We already know about all the dirty things you've done. All right. Noah gave up. It's my fault. In this world, there were indeed things that were better if one didn't know about them. Noah really regretted asking Alice this question. However, Alice didn't understand the meaning behind Noah's words and frowned. Do you think it's useful to admit your mistake now? The evil things you've done can't be erased just because of your words. Noah was speechless. Oh, right. Alice suddenly tilted her head and asked. What do you mean by forcing yourself on her? For the first time, Noah had the urge to die. We're here. About 5 minutes later, Alice stopped in her tracks and pointed in front. Your dorm is there. Upon hearing this, Noah raised his eyes and looked in the direction that Alice was pointing at. Suddenly, a very imposing building appeared in front of Noah's eyes. It was a building that was much larger than an ordinary house. There were many small rooms inside, and there was a large shower beside it. In front of the building, at the entrance, there was a large pile of wooden barrels filled with straw fodder. Inside, there were many fine horses with their eyes closed and heads lowered, sleeping soundly. Yes. In each of the small rooms in the building, there was a horse. Noah was completely dumbfounded. That can't be a stable, right? This Alice, is she planning to let me live in a stable? What are you looking at? Alice said in dissatisfaction. I'm not showing you the stable, but the side of the stable. Now that Alice had mentioned it, Noah finally realized what was going on. Just beside the stable, there was a simple hut. It was a small wooden hut that looked like it was about to collapse. How is it? Not bad, right? Alice said with some pride. It took me 3 hours to build it using my contracted spirits. Noah was once again speechless. This time, Noah was completely sure. If it wasn't that Alice really wanted to take revenge, then it was that the eyes and values of the leader of the knights were different from his. Noah could only let out a long sigh, and extended a hand toward the extremely simple hut. Just as Alice was wondering what Noah was planning to do, Noah's eyes sharpened. Ha! Accompanied by a deep roar, a burst of powerful divine might energy suddenly erupted with Noah's palm as the center. Dong! The berserk divine might transformed into the most substantial shockwave. It scraped the ground and stirred up sand and dust. It carried with it a strong vibration and whistling sound. It surged toward the simple and crude hut like a toppling mountain and overturning sea, covering it. Bang! Unsurprisingly, the simple hut made of wooden blocks was directly swept away by the violent divine aura, completely falling apart. Alice sucked in a cold breath as she watched the scene unfold. Just by releasing the power of the divine might, it could actually cause a physical effect. What kind of powerful divine might was required to accomplish such a feat? It was just blown away, and it fell apart immediately. Noah glanced at Alice. "You intend to let me live in a place like this? Are you dissatisfied with something?" Alice reacted and stared at Noah. "Don't tell me you want to live in the female dormitory." Noah slapped his forehead and ignored Alice. He looked around and then came to the bottom of a tree. "Who?" The tip of his foot touched the ground, and Noah leaped into the air and onto the tree. He leaned against the trunk, sat on a thick branch, hugged his arms, closed his eyes, and entered a state of deep sleep. Seeing this, Alice couldn't help but be at a loss. He can't be planning to live on the tree, right? Chapter 950. This was an extremely austere shout and battle cry that couldn't be expressed with words. It was a battlefield that was filled with murderous shouts and sounds of fighting. A battlefield where a fortress was located. On such a battlefield, it was as if the people were shouting out the last glory of their lives. Loud and clear battle cries resounded throughout the sky, causing the air to be filled with a solemn and stirring atmosphere, causing one's heart to tighten. And on this battlefield, there were two camps. One was the camp that wore elven devices that were transformed from elves and constantly launched fierce attacks in the direction of the fortress. The other was a faction that used the fortress as a stronghold and mercilessly released their elves towards the charging faction using the elven devices, allowing the elves with various appearances, attributes, abilities, and levels to retaliate. With the elven users wearing different elven magical equipment and the elven users controlling elves of different shapes at the center, the warriors of the two camps engaged in a bitter battle on the battlefield. For a moment, the space was filled with saber light and sword shadows, the air was filled with waves of divine power impact, and even the sound of weapons clashing constantly shook the ears. The scene was extremely shocking. However, the elves and elven users that were fighting on the battlefield were only small soldiers of the two camps. The real battle that determined the outcome of the battle wasn't carried out on the battlefield, but in the magnificent fortress that entered the final stage. It was a corridor that was dyed red by the blood of a large number of fallen soldiers. On the corridor, a young girl with beautiful golden hair that reached her waist and full of majesty and holiness was charging forward like a gust of wind while repeatedly brandishing a steel sword that shone with dazzling light like a storm, causing sword light to flash in all directions. Even in such a corridor that was dyed red with blood, the young girl's body still wasn't stained by even a drop of blood. She was like a lotus flower that wasn't stained by mud, very pure and holy. And the young girl's figure that repeatedly brandished the steel sword that shone with silver light seemed to be dancing lightly and gracefully, looking extremely beautiful. It was a gorgeous battle technique known as the sword dance. The young girl smoothly executed this battle technique that was closely related to elves and slashed the elves that were attacking her one by one. Then, as the sword light flashed and her figure flashed, she killed the elven users that were controlling these elves on the spot in bursts of blood splattering everywhere. Even so, the young girl didn't stop her pace and didn't even slow down her speed. She constantly attacked, and attacked again. This process lasted for an unknown period of time. During this period, no one knew how many elven users and elves died in the young girl's hands. However, the historic battle that brought the war to an end was unavoidable. Wielding the steel sword that shone with silver light, the young girl killed the last elf, passed through the corridor, and arrived at the deepest part of the fortress. In front of the young girl, in the distance, there was a throne. It was a throne that was surrounded by dark flames that burned fiercely as if it was used by the ghost king of hell. A person was sitting on the throne. Because of the dark flames that burned fiercely, the appearance of the person on the throne was somewhat blurry and swaying. But even so, one could still tell from the outline of the person's body. The person on the other side was a male. The man's appearance couldn't be seen at all as he leisurely sat on the throne. His body was burning with dark flames, and the space around him began to distort. Elves of various shapes and sizes with terrifying pressure drilled out one after another. A male elven user that could enslave elves. The other party's identity was already obvious. Solomon. The demon king that once brought a devastating disaster to the entire continent. According to the legends, this demon king was so powerful that he could even control the elves of the 72 pillars. Originally, if one formed a contract with two elves at the same time, it would already cause the elves to interfere with each other, which would negatively affect the elves. Under such circumstances, the demon king named Solomon could effortlessly form a contract with the elves of the 72 pillars at the same time and perfectly control these 72 elves. That was simply a god-level ability. It was precisely because of this that the demon king named Solomon had the ability to bring disaster to the entire continent, causing people to be abnormally fearful of him. However, facing the demon king who had the ability to control the 72 pillar spirits, the girl who held the silver sword did not have a trace of fear in her heart. His aura was even stronger than that of the demon king who controlled the 72 spirit pillars. Immediately after, the young girl with the steel sword in her hand shot out like an arrow from a bow. She leaped up and shot out. In his hand, on the gorgeous steel sword that was covered in dazzling light, there was a paragraph of ancient elven language inscribed on the blade. If translated, the meaning of this elvish text was as follows: World Protector, Terminus Estate. Noah abruptly opened his eyes, as if he had just woken up from a nightmare. His eyes flickered with some lingering fear. However, what was imprinted in Noah's eyes, which still had lingering fear, was not a cruel battlefield, but an environment filled with birds and fragrant flowers. Surrounding him was a vast courtyard. In the distance, there were luxurious buildings. On the side, the horse that had already awakened with the arrival of morning lowered its head, chewing the grass in the wooden bucket in front of it, making everything seem so peaceful. And Noah, naturally, was sitting on a thick branch, leaning against the trunk as he woke up in the tree. The sky was already bright. One by one, the witches wearing pure white uniforms walked from afar, laughing and chatting. But when they saw Noah, their faces were immediately shocked, and they let out a soft scream, looking in the direction of Noah, chattering about something. Sensing that in the courtyard not far away, there were actually many girls gathered together, looking at him with fear and curiosity, Noah bitterly smiled and raised one hand. On the back of this hand, there was a mysterious and unfathomable, but incomparably powerful seal spirit imprint that was left behind after forming a contract. Looking at the seal on the back of his hand, Noah muttered, "Is that the sword spirit's dream?" In the world of Type Moon, the master who formed a contract with the heroic spirit in the form of a servant through the Holy Grail of Fuyuki City could see the past memories and life of his servant in the dream. And in this world, the elves and elven users who also formed a contract could also share dreams with each other. Especially when the elves or elven users had some problems, making the door that connected the two unable to open, this phenomenon would become even more frequent. Now, Noah encountered such a thing. The elven user girl who had the final battle with the demon king. Noah's eyes flashed. Could it be, that is the saintess who saved the world? Why would he dream of the final battle between the saintess who saved the world and the demon king of disaster when he shared the dream with the elves? Don't tell me that the sword sprite is really the saintess sprite, the famous demon slayer. Noah recalled the elven words engraved on the sword in the girl's hand that he saw in the dream. World Guardian God, Terminus Estate. That wouldn't be the original name of the demon slayer, would it? Before Noah could think of a reason, a cold and familiar voice sounded under the tree. How long do you plan to stay up there like this? Accompanied by such a sentence, Alice, who appeared under the tree without him knowing, raised her head, stared at Noah, and said loudly, "Hurry up and come down." Noah was awakened from his own world, shook his head, and suppressed the contents of this unusual dream deep in his heart. No matter how powerful the elves were, it was useless if they couldn't be summoned. It was more important to think about how to summon the elves. Chapter 951. Why are you in a daze over there? Seeing that Noah had been sitting on the tree and clenching his hand that was engraved with the elven mark, Alice raised her eyebrows, her tone stern. Hurry up and come down. Noah pursed his lips when he heard this. He stood up and supported himself with one hand on the tree trunk. Then, he leaped down and landed in front of Alice in an extremely nimble manner. As Noah landed, Alice, who was less than a meter away from Noah, was immediately hit by a masculine scent that was different from the light fragrance of a young girl. Her body stiffened and her face turned red. She hurriedly escaped and pointed at Noah with a red face. Don't suddenly appear in front of me. Idiot. Noah was speechless after being scolded by Alice. I can't not come down, I can't come down either. What do you want? Ahem. Alice seemed to know that she was being too unreasonable and could only pretend to cough before changing the topic. Did you sleep well last night? Hearing this, Noah looked at Alice in surprise. Doesn't this guy hate me? Why was she suddenly concerned about him? Don't misunderstand. I'm just asking as the leader of the knights. Alice blushed as she complained to Noah. It's not because I'm concerned about you. Hearing Alice's words, Noah smiled. It seemed that although Alice didn't say anything, she couldn't get over the fact that Noah could only sleep on a tree. If Noah had obediently stayed in the simple house last night, it would have been fine. After all, there were walls and tiles, and he didn't need to be exposed to the elements. Compared to the other students, it was just a matter of treatment. However, Noah had gone to sleep in a tree, which made the leader of the knights feel apologetic. On the surface, she was very strict, but that was probably because she didn't allow herself to be frivolous as the leader of the knights. Actually, this girl's heart was quite gentle. At that moment, Noah shook his head with a smile. Thank you for your concern, Knight Commander. I slept very well last night. Is that so? Alice intentionally coughed twice and pretended to ask casually. But didn't you sleep on the tree? Can you sleep well like that? There's nothing wrong with sleeping on a tree, right? Noah stretched lazily. In the past, when I was cultivating in the deep mountains and forests, not to mention sleeping on trees, I even slept on uneven rocks. For me, I really don't have any requirements for accommodation. Not only that, in the world of the Dark Bullet, when he first decided to help the cursed child there, Noah even lived in the ruins of the wilderness with the children who had protozoan virus flowing in their bodies. In addition to the 4 years of cultivation in the deep mountains and forests, all these experiences created a character of Noah who was not too extravagant and did not have any excessive requirements for material things. Otherwise, with a treasure vault filled with countless treasures, if it was an ordinary person, they would have already lived an extravagant life of a nouveau riche. Noah's words made Alice more or less surprised. You also cultivated in the deep mountains and forests. Of course. Noah glanced at Alice. There is no free lunch in this world. If you want to get something, you have to give something. The only people who will fulfill all your requirements for free are your parents, and only a few others. After he finished speaking, Noah glanced at the surroundings and looked at the young girls who were hiding far away and pointing at him. They couldn't conceal their curiosity and fear, and he spoke helplessly. Speaking of which, Captain Knight, can I trouble you to think of a way to solve this situation? Alice, who had fallen into deep thought because of Noah's words, finally reacted. She looked around, and when she saw those students hiding at the side and secretly sizing Noah up, her expression turned serious as she spoke loudly. Class is about to start. Those who should go back to class, go back to class. Don't stay here. Yes, the surrounding girls immediately dragged out their voices and replied. As they chattered, they scattered in all directions and kept looking back, secretly looking at Noah. Then, Noah vaguely heard such a conversation. That's the rumored male elf messenger, right? He doesn't look as scary as others say. Yes. Undoubtedly, they say that he has 3 heads, 6 arms, 8 legs, and is very ugly. No, I heard that he has 4 heads, 4 arms, and 12 legs. Doesn't he have 8 heads? Does he have 8 heads? I think so, then I must have remembered wrongly. I knew it, right? Hearing this conversation, Noah's mood was as if a bottle of 5 different flavors had been knocked over. Sour, sweet, bitter, spicy, all sorts of flavors were present. It seemed that the rumors about Noah that spread in the Elven Academy were much more exaggerated than Noah had imagined. Oh, right. At this moment, Alice placed a small package in front of Noah. Take this. Noah took it, puzzled. What is this? Your school uniform and your student ID. Alice turned her head away and stuttered, your school uniform and your student ID. As for your residence, I will report to the dean and make other arrangements. That's all. After saying this, Alice turned around, as if she didn't want Noah to see her less strict side, and walked away. This girl. Noah could only laugh as he hugged the package. She really isn't honest enough. Not long after, Noah reappeared in the courtyard of the Elven Academy. At this moment, Noah was already wearing the uniform of the Alicia Elf Academy. The basic color scheme was the same as the other students. It was white with some black lines, but it was a male style. Of course, the lower half of his body was not a skirt, but a pair of pure white trousers. It was quite comfortable to wear. The uniforms of the Elven Academy were all made of cloth that was blessed with elven magic and ritual music. Not only did it have some defensive capabilities, but it also had some functions to protect against cold, heat, and even poison. Unfortunately, Noah's body had a strong resistance to curses. For example, the protection provided by elven magic and ritual music, regardless of whether it was beneficial or not, would all be repelled by Noah's body. Therefore, when Noah put on this uniform, it became an extremely ordinary student uniform without any defensive capabilities. Of course, Noah didn't really need it. Walking in the courtyard of the Elven Academy, Noah scratched his head. Where is the library? In the morning, Noah had a dream about having an extraordinary relationship with his contracted spirit. That dream, which was related to the Saintess and the Demon King, told Noah that his contracted spirit was definitely not an ordinary sword spirit. It was very likely that it was the contracted spirit that the Saintess of Salvation used to kill the Demon King when she was alive. However, Noah actually didn't know much about the Saintess. It was only because the legend was too famous that he saw a portion of it in the book that he borrowed from the dean's office. In order to find out more about his contracted spirit, Noah needed to understand more about it. That way, he might be able to find out what was wrong with his contracted spirit. However, Noah wasn't particularly familiar with the academy. He only knew that there was a library here where many secrets of the Elven Empire could be found. But, where is this library? Noah stood in the middle of the courtyard with a distressed expression. If only there was someone to lead the way. Almost at the same time, a voice sounded from behind Noah. What are you doing? Noah was startled and immediately turned his head to look behind him. There was a petite girl with bright red hair tied into 2 ponytails standing there with her hands on her hips. She was looking at Noah with her head held high and her chest puffed out. She was unwilling to lose in front of Noah. Noah blinked. Claire Lucio. Why is this girl here? But, she came at the right time. Chapter 952. The Fairy Contracted by the Saintess of Salvation. Claire was startled by Noah's words as she walked on a sunny road. That sword fairy is the Saintess of Salvation's contracted fairy. It's only a possibility. Noah waved his hand, indicating for Claire not to make a fuss. But I did have a dream where the saintess had a final battle with the demon king when she was alive. And the saintess' elven device, that shining silver steel sword, looked very much like the sword spirit we met in the ancestral hall. Sharing the dreams of fairies. Claire tilted her head. Now that I think about it, that sword sprite might really be the contracted sprite of the saintess of salvation. From time to time, I would have extremely happy dreams of eating canned food. That should be Scarlet's dream. After saying this, Claire's expression became more or less vexed. I didn't expect the saintess of salvation's contracted fairy to be in the elven forest of the Elven Academy. If the contract had been successful at that time, as she said this, the vexed expression on Claire's face turned into a thick unwillingness. Noah, who had clearly seen Claire's expression, asked without batting an eyelid. Why do you desire powers so much? Claire's footsteps paused imperceptibly, but she quickly returned to her original state. A resolute expression appeared in her fiery red eyes. Because I have something I must do no matter what. For this, I need a powerful fairy. Is that so? Noah was silent for a moment before speaking. But there are many ways to pursue power. Your method gives me a dangerous feeling of wanting to achieve it regardless of everything. That's not a good thing. It doesn't matter. There wasn't a trace of confusion in Claire's tone. As long as I can achieve my goal, it doesn't matter what happens to me. After saying this, Claire didn't say anything else. She just kept walking forward with her head lowered, silently urging Noah to speed up. Looking at Claire's back, Noah followed. This was a very vast library. However, rather than calling it a library, it was more like a large sunroom. In addition to the bookshelves filled with books on the four walls, the center was paved with red bricks. Some were arranged with flower beds, while others were arranged with lawns. There was a large glass window on the ceiling, and luxurious tables and chairs were placed below. It looked quite attractive. Is this the library? Noah's tone sounded uncertain. Why does it look more like an indoor cafe? That's for resting. Claire pointed at the bookshelves leaning against the walls. As for the books, they are all there. Only a few extremely secretive ones are sealed in the inner area. Only those who have the permission of the Academy's headmaster can enter that place. Even the Wind King Knights are only permitted to take a look around when they are patrolling, but they don't have the authority to flip through the books. You want to find books related to the Saintess and the Holy Sword, don't you? Claire crossed her arms. Then you can find the books you want here. Is that so? Noah smiled and looked at Claire. Then thank you for leading the way. I'm not trying to help you. Claire turned her head away shyly. It's just that you've already snatched my spirit, but I can't summon it. It's just that I can't stand it. Apart from that, there's no other meaning. Yes. Noah spread his hands. Anyway, I'm more or less used to the girls in this academy being tsundere. I'm not tsundere. Claire retorted. Unfortunately, Noah ignored Claire's rebuttal and walked forward. At this moment, Noah suddenly noticed a place. It was a small display window. There were two portraits on the display window. One was a girl with long silver gray hair, about 14 or 15 years old. The other was a girl with long black hair that reached her waist, about 13 or 14 years old. Of these two girls, one was wearing a formal suit with a strict style, while the other was wearing a foreign costume similar to that of a witch. What they had in common was that both girls held a pitch-black knight's sword in their hands. Even though the style was different, the pitch-black color and strange shape were still very eye-catching. Noah only felt that the girl with long silver gray hair around 14 or 15 years old looked very familiar. When he saw the pitch-black knight's sword in the girl's hands, Noah couldn't help but be shocked. That can't be Grey Vath, right? Upon closer inspection, Although the girl with long silver-gray hair looked a little naive, he could tell that she was Grey Vath. And that pitch-black knight's sword was Grey Vath's elven equipment that Noah had seen more than once. That guy actually hung his own portrait in the library. Noah was speechless. Isn't that too narcissistic? What are you saying? Claire looked at Noah in disbelief. It'd be weird if there wasn't a portrait of the dean here, right? Oh. Noah said strangely. Why? You don't know. Claire's expression became even more incredulous. The dean is known as the strongest elven envoy on the continent. You don't know. The strongest elven envoy on the continent. Noah was really startled and said in surprise. Grey Vath is the strongest elven envoy on the continent. Did you crawl out from some countryside? Claire couldn't help but be dumbfounded. When the dean was young, she was not only one of the 12 most outstanding elven envoys in the Odisha Empire known as the 12 Knights, but she was also active in the front lines during the Lambard War that swept across the entire continent. Who doesn't know the Dusk Witch? Noah was speechless. So it was like that. No wonder when Noah expressed that he didn't know Grey Vath had a funny expression. Was that witch really that famous? Aren't you the dean's disciple? How come you don't know anything? Claire looked at Noah strangely. Don't tell me you don't even know what a witch is. Noah laughed dryly, letting Claire know the answer. You've become the disciple of the continent's strongest elf user, but you don't even know who your master is. You can't even summon the saint's contracted spirit even after forming a contract with her. I really don't know what to say. Claire sighed and solemnly raised a finger. Listen carefully. The so-called witch is a witch who can form a contract with a magical elf. A magical elf. It was a type of spiritual structure that was extremely different from humans and elves. It was said that it was absolutely impossible for elven envoys to tame them and form a contract with them. Forming a contract with such an elf was almost the same as an ordinary human using his hands and feet to tame a wild tiger in the forest. It was impossible. However, the world was big and full of strange things. There were ordinary humans who could tame wild tigers in the forest with their hands and feet. There were also elven envoys who could form a contract with magical elves. And elven envoys who could form a contract with magical elves were usually called witches. Grey Vath was called the Dusk Witch because of her valiant strength and active battle record, and also because she had the qualifications of a witch who could form a contract with magical elves. Not only that, Claire looked at Grey Vath's portrait with some longing in her eyes. The dean was also the champion of the Elven Sword Dance Festival 24 years ago. Elven Sword Dance Festival. Noah's heart moved. Noah had also heard of this term. It was known as the world's largest and best sacrificial ceremony. When this sacrificial ceremony was mentioned, one had to mention an existence. The Elven King. They governed the various elements that made up the world and stood at the peak of the elemental elf world. At the same time, they were the peak existence that ruled over all elves. Just like in the world of the shaped moon, Gaia managed the planet and Alea managed the humans, the Elven King managed the elements of the human world and the elemental elf world. Without the Elven King, there would be no elements in this world. They were such important existences. Chapter 953. Noah didn't know if the elven kings of this world could be compared to Gaia and Alea. Noah only knew that in this world, the elven kings who were in charge of managing the various elements of the human world and the elemental world were existences at the peak. Just like how gods were to the humans. To the humans and elves of this world, the elven kings were synonymous with gods. And there were a total of 5 elven kings. Fire Elven King, Volcanic. Wind Elven King, Bevel. Earth Elven King, Rod Leah. Water Elven King, Isalia Shiva. Holy Elven King, Alexander. The 5 Elven Kings were in charge of each of the basic elements of this world, namely fire, wind, earth, water, and holy. These 5 elements brought blessings to humans and elves. So to the people of this world, the 5 Elven Kings were godlike existences. It was said that in this world, there were 5 witch concubines who directly served the 5 Elven Kings. These 5 witch concubines who directly served the 5 Elven Kings were called Elven concubines. The Elven concubines were in charge of serving the Elven Kings and conveying the Elven Kings' will to the world. And the Elven Sword Dance Festival was a sacrificial ceremony for the 5 Elven Kings. In this ceremony, the best elves from each country would compete in a sword dance. They would use the most beautiful sword dance to satisfy the Elven King and determine the strongest Elven envoy. The strongest Elven envoy would be able to make a wish to the Elven King. No matter what the wish was, it would be fulfilled. At first, when he heard about the Elven Sword Dance Festival, Noah even had some thoughts. After all, although the nature was different, the Elven Sword Dance Festival of this world was similar to the Holy Grail War of the Type Moon world. They both had to compete to decide the winner. After the winner was decided, a wish could be fulfilled. Furthermore, both of them were rituals. The difference was that the Elven Sword Dance Festival was more like a large-scale carnival, while the Holy Grail War was a pure killing game. The Elven Sword Dance Festival is held at irregular intervals. Only when the Elven King wants to hold it will the Elven concubines convey the Elven King's will and make preparations, Claire continued to explain. In the past 30 years, the Elven Sword Dance Festival has been held 3 times. They were held 3 years ago, 15 years ago, and 24 years ago. The headmaster participated in the Elven Sword Dance Festival 24 years ago, and became the champion of that festival at the age of 15. That can't be right, right? Noah was just about to nod when he suddenly thought of something and shuddered. If Grey Vaz was already 15 years old 24 years ago, doesn't that mean that the witch is almost 40 years old now? This was not something that could be ignored. First of all, Grey Vaz looked like she was in her 20s or 30s. How could she be in her 40s? What's more, Grey and Vaz had displayed their powerful elven abilities in front of Noah more than once. However, everyone knew that the power of an elven envoy would begin to decline after reaching its peak. The age of decline was about 25 years old. If Grey Vaz was really around 40 years old, then her power as an elven envoy would have completely declined, right? How could she still have the title of the strongest elven envoy on the continent? Did you forget that the winner of the Elven Sword Dance Festival can make a wish to the Elven King? Claire reminded. I heard that the headmaster made a wish to the Elven King for eternal youth. No matter how much time passed, her appearance would not age, her body would not decline, and her power as an elven envoy would always be at its peak. Therefore, she had already surpassed the age of the highest elven envoy. That's possible. Noah couldn't help sweating. No wonder the witch felt that she was old when she lost to me. So it wasn't just for show. Lose to you? Claire blinked her eyes strangely. What did she lose to you in? No, nothing. Noah scratched his cheek, then pointed to another portrait and changed the topic. Then, who is that person? Next to the young Grey Vaz, there was another portrait. She had long black hair that reached her waist like a waterfall, and she was wearing an exotic costume that looked like a witch's costume. Compared to Grey Vaz, that girl looked even younger. However, that girl could be placed next to the portrait of Grey Vaz, who was known as the strongest elven envoy on the continent. Her identity was definitely not ordinary. You don't even know her. Noah didn't know if it was an illusion. If Claire was surprised when Noah said that he didn't know about Grey Vaz's life, then she was angry now. It's understandable that you don't know about the headmaster's life. After all, it was something that happened many years ago. However, you don't even know the strongest sword dancer. Are you still an elven envoy? What are you angry about? Noah raised his eyebrows. Don't tell me that she's still your idol. That's right. Claire admitted generously. Can't I? I didn't say that I can't. Noah asked curiously. However, since she can become the idol of an unruly young miss like you, she must have a great background. Isn't that obvious? Claire raised her eyebrows and glared at Noah. That's the elf envoy who dominated the elf sword dance festival 3 years ago when she was only 14 years old. Everyone called her the strongest sword dancer. Not only me, many elf envoys in active service were captivated by her beautiful sword dance. Even the elf envoys who lost to her were attracted by her. What's so strange about me worshipping her? The strongest sword dancer. Noah nodded in understanding. Then, what's her name? Claire raised her head, her eyes full of bright light as she spat out this name in a loud voice. Lifelessons. When this name entered Noah's ears from Claire's mouth, Noah suddenly felt his heart beat faster. An indescribable intuition like a bolt of lightning flashed through Noah's heart. Noah's eyes narrowed as a pair of pitch-black pupils flashed. There was no way that Noah didn't recognize this feeling. Surprisingly, it was the hint that the world had given Noah when he had obtained information related to the whereabouts of the world fragment. In other words, the world fragment that was lost in this world was very likely related to the strongest sword dancer. He didn't expect that he would obtain information related to the whereabouts of the world fragment in a place like this. This was truly an unexpected gain. Lifelessons is the most popular of the elven sword dance festivals. In our Osea Empire, her popularity can even be compared to the strongest elven envoy on the continent, the Dean of the Academy. She has become the object of admiration in almost everyone's hearts. Claire spoke without stopping. You actually don't even know the strongest sword dancer. You've been an elven envoy for so long in vain. Sorry, I haven't been an elven envoy for very long. Noah laughed bitterly. He suppressed the restless feeling in his heart and the corners of his mouth lifted slightly. However, I'll remember her name. Lifelessons, I must meet you. On the side, Claire saw Noah lift the corners of his mouth and suddenly emit a powerful presence. She didn't know why, but her pretty face suddenly reddened and her heartbeat sped up. You. If a guy like you were in front of Lifelessons, you would definitely be beaten to a pulp. Claire's face was red. I don't think that you're very handsome like this. Noah immediately blinked and looked at Claire with a strange expression. Being stared at by Noah like this, Claire's pretty face became redder and redder, redder and redder. In the end, her embarrassment turned into anger. Don't keep staring at me like this. Pervert. Beast. As she shouted, the elven mark on the back of one of Claire's hands lit up. It seemed that this unruly young miss was planning to use violence to cover up her excessive embarrassment. Just as Noah felt a bit speechless and was about to give Claire a hard knock on the head, an elegant voice with a sense of superiority suddenly sounded. It's too noisy, Claire Lucio. Chapter 954. You're too noisy, Claire Lucio. Accompanied by such an elegant voice, the light on the elven mark in Claire's hand paused for a moment. An unlucky expression appeared on her young but rather cute face as if she had encountered something bad. It was Noah's first time seeing such an expression on Claire's face. Even when facing a male elf user like himself, this pure and innocent young lady didn't reveal such a blatant expression. Who could make this barbaric young lady reveal such an unlucky expression? With such curiosity, Noah turned around and looked at the source of the voice. Then, a young lady entered Noah's field of vision. You must keep quiet in the library. This is etiquette that ordinary people know. With such a sentence, the young lady walked towards Noah and Claire with graceful steps. And as nobles, we should pay more attention to etiquette than ordinary people. If you don't even know this little bit of etiquette, you don't have the face to call yourself a noble. Claire's face darkened after hearing the young lady's words. As for Noah, he sized up the young lady in front of him. She was an extremely beautiful young lady. The young lady had gorgeous light blonde hair that reached her waist. Her hair was also decorated with a long purple ribbon that curled between the strands of hair, setting off an inexplicable sense of nobility. The young lady's appearance was rather pure and refined. Her pretty face was exquisite as if it was meticulously drawn. Her eyes were like a pair of green gems that emitted a faint glow from time to time. She was such a beautiful girl. At this moment, an elegant smile hung on her beautiful face that was as exquisite as a painting. She stroked her long golden hair with one hand, causing it to flutter back and forth in the air. It was quite pleasing to the eye. Noah could be considered to have seen many noble young ladies. However, those who could perfectly set off the noble temperament were Lilith, Erica, Lais, and Rin Enbin. Similarly, the young lady in front of him could also be considered one. And behind this young lady, there was another young lady. A young girl wearing a light-made uniform with wavy lace, with neatly combed black hair and a small white headdress on her head. Maid? Noah was stunned. Why are there maids in Alicia Elf Academy? While Noah was stunned, Claire coldly snorted and spoke without any trace of politeness. Don't impose your so-called aristocratic etiquette on me, Lindley Lorenfrost. I'm tired of it. Ah, so you're saying that I've already mentioned it to you many times. The noble Lady Claire called Lindley laughed. I've said it so many times and you still don't understand. As expected, you're still a child. As she spoke, the girl named Lindley purposely glanced at a part of Claire's body that wasn't protruding at all. She snickered, causing Claire's eyes to widen and her face to redden. Of course, this time, Claire wasn't embarrassed, but angry. Are you here to pick a fight? Lynn Siley didn't even have the time to speak when the female servant standing not far behind her laughed softly and said, Eldest Miss just wanted to greet you. Caw. Carol. Lindley's elegant posture was defeated in an instant. She raised her fist as if she was very embarrassed, and lightly knocked on the maid's back. You. What nonsense are you saying now? Ma. The maid named Carol smiled as she endured her young miss's punches that didn't have any strength behind them. Really, eldest miss has always been so uncanny. What are you talking about? Claire turned her head away. Then it would have been better if you said that from the start. Why did you have to act so high and mighty? That's not high and mighty. Lindley said angrily. As a noble, you should maintain your elegance at all times. Haven't you been taught this before? Looking at Lindley's angry expression, Noah smiled bitterly in his heart. Looks like I really misjudged her this time. She's just an ordinary girl. However, this kind of Lindley made Noah feel a sense of intimacy. At this time, Lindley deliberately coughed to cover up her loss of composure. Then she noticed Noah and her beautiful eyebrows twitched slightly. You're the rumored male elf messenger. I am indeed an elf messenger. Noah narrowed his eyes. But I'm definitely not the male elf messenger you've heard of in the rumors. God knows, in this academy, what kind of rumors had Noah become? There were even rumors of 3 heads, 6 arms, and 8 legs. If he admitted it here, then Noah could really go to the Rare Animal Protection Association or the World Heritage Protection Association to apply for a place to stay. That's true. Lindley did not maintain a fearful and curious attitude towards Noah like other girls. Instead, she treated him like an ordinary person. She put her face in front of Noah's face, looked at him for a while, and smiled sweetly. Your looks are not bad, very good. You have the qualifications to stand next to me, the eldest daughter of the Lorenfrost family. Ha! Noah was puzzled. Doesn't that mean, if I'm not good looking, I can't stand next to you? Isn't that obvious? Linley raised her head, one hand on her waist, and a confident smile on her face. To be able to stand next to me, Linley Lorenfrost, how can you not have a passable appearance? As soon as these words fell, Carol, who had been hiding behind Linley, laughed out loud. Young miss wants to be friends with you. Caw. Carol. Linley's pretty face blushed, as if her thoughts were seen through. If you talk nonsense again, I won't cook for you tonight. Carol was shocked. She pitifully pulled on Lynn Siley's clothes. No, young miss, if young miss doesn't cook for me, I will starve to death. Humph, it's good that you know. Linley's heart seemed to soften, and her tone relaxed. If you are obedient, I will add more food for you tonight. If you sleep in tomorrow, I will also wake you up. Young miss. Carol suddenly looked extremely touched. Little did she know, after hearing the conversation between the two, Noah was speechless. Why did the young miss, Linley, have to cook for her own maid, and also be responsible for waking up the maid who slept in? Why would the maid not be able to survive without the young miss cooking? What a development full of complaints. However, Noah still had a good impression of Linley. The witches in this academy were really too pure, so pure that when Noah, a male elven user, appeared, it immediately caused all kinds of gossip and rumors to fly in the minds of these young miss who did not care about worldly affairs, causing Noah to be badly battered. However, Noah had no way to make things difficult for her. He couldn't lose his temper at her just because she was too pure, right? If he did that, then he wouldn't be Noah. Only Linley didn't treat Noah as a romantic and gossipy character in other people's rumors. She looked at Noah with her own eyes, and there was no element of discrimination in it. She was just purely curious and interested in Noah. For Noah, who was treated differently in this academy and couldn't make things difficult, this was really no different from redemption. However, this girl didn't seem to be very frank. That maid called Carol, on the other hand, translated her young miss's thoughts very cleanly. Ah. Noah rubbed his head and smiled at Linley. Anyway, since we know each other, then please give me more advice. Linley was slightly startled, and then reacted, unable to hide her nervousness. Yes. Yes. Please give me more advice. Why? Why did the two of you suddenly become friends? Claire, who was left out to the side, couldn't bear to be left out and interrupted, glaring at Linley. You suddenly ran out to introduce yourself to others, and even left me out to the side. As expected of a dog thief. Who are you calling a dog? Linley glared at Claire. You're the one who's an airport. 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 Claire's face suddenly distorted. That look was as if she had been poked in a sore spot. Chapter 955. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the library became somewhat sinister following the interaction between Claire and Linley. Seeing Claire and Linley glaring at each other, Noah couldn't help but be stunned. Is the relationship between these two that bad? There's no such thing. Carol, who had hidden beside Noah at some point, laughed without a care. Miss Claire and Miss Claire are childhood friends who have a very good relationship. They've been close since they were young. Close. Noah helplessly pointed at Claire and Linley, who were baring their teeth at each other, as if they wanted to swallow each other whole. You call this close? Yes. Carol smiled innocently. Very close, right? Okay. Noah really didn't know what to say. However, just as Noah was about to shut his mouth, Claire and Linley were about to display their close relationship. You really came to pick a fight, Claire said with incomparable anger. In that case, I won't be polite. With that, the elven mark on the back of Claire's hand flashed with red light. Guardian of the red flames, watchman of the sleepless furnace, here to fulfill the blood contract, listen to my orders. A surge of flames accompanied Claire's contractual chant and suddenly appeared in front of her, rolling into a vortex. Within the whirlpool of flames, the fire cat spirit, whose entire body was covered in flames, slowly appeared. It landed on the ground and let out a ferocious roar in Linley's direction. You should be the one picking a fight. Linley shouted, not to be outdone. Don't think that you're the only one who can summon elves. With that, a faint blue light gradually rose from Linley's body. That was a cold light that caused the surrounding temperature to drop sharply. Chilling ice-fanged beast, heartless hunter of the forest, here to fulfill the blood contract, listen to my orders. As if falling from the sky, a whirlwind mixed with ice and snow suddenly rolled up from above Linley and abruptly descended. After spinning a circle on the ground like a gust of wind, it condensed together and turned into a block of solid ice. Within the solid ice, a white wolf with beautiful fur and ice and snow all over its body opened its pair of crystal-like eyes and suddenly shook. Bang! With a loud explosion, the ice that wrapped around the beautiful white wolf exploded, turning into ice shards that fell to the ground. That's... Noah said in surprise. A high elf. Yes. Carol said with a smile. That's miscontracted elf, magic ice elf Fenrir. With his outstanding perception ability, Noah could judge the elven rank of the fire cat and ice wolf based on their aura and aura. However, even without the ability to sense, people could still easily determine the level of elves under normal circumstances. There were generally two ways to judge an elven rank's rank. One was to judge based on the elf's divine might. Of course, the higher the rank of the elf, the greater the power, and the more powerful the divine might. Therefore, as long as one felt the divine might of the elf users could generally easily judge an elf's rank. The other method was based on the appearance. An elf's rank and appearance were closely related. Low-rank elves generally didn't have an obvious appearance, or only had a simple structure. For example, the light balls, will-o'-the-wisps, misht, and the like that Noah had seen before, were all low-rank elves. Elves with extremely small bodies like fireflies and small lizards, whose body structures were quite simple, were similarly low-rank elves. Middle-rank elves could already have an obvious appearance, and their bodies were much larger than low-rank elves. For example, the stone giant that Noah encountered when he first came to this world was a middle-rank elf. As for high-rank elves, elves of this rank usually existed in the form of wild beasts, magical beasts, or ferocious beasts. For example, Claire's fire cat elf. For example, Linley's magic ice elf. If nothing unexpected happened, these elves with animal forms were all high elves. Noah had even heard that among the elves, there was an elf that had the exact same appearance as a human. Those elves with human forms had power that even high-rank elves couldn't compare to. Not only were they the highest-rank elves in the entire elemental elf world, but they were also the rarest and were called the highest-rank elves. Although high-rank elves weren't as rare as the highest-rank elves, they weren't common goods. Basically, except for those high-rank nobles who had high-rank elves that had been passed down for generations to contract, ordinary elf users couldn't find such high-rank elves even if they wanted to contract high-rank elves. In the end, Claire's and Linley's contracted elves were both high-rank elves. Although Noah wasn't surprised, he was quite surprised. The family background of these two girls was definitely not ordinary. Of course, this wasn't something that Noah should be concerned about. What are you planning to do? Noah sighed. This is the library. If you start fighting here and damage those precious books, you won't be able to get away with just a few words of punishment. Claire and Linley were speechless at the same time. Don't think that these two girls' contracted elves didn't have much ability just because they weren't big. The power of high-rank elves was enough to rival large dragon beasts. Once they got serious, It was a bit of an exaggeration to say that they could destroy everything, but it was only a matter of time to turn a building into ruins. Whether it was Claire Scarlet or Linley's Fenrir, they were both high-rank elves. If they started fighting here, the library would either be burned to the ground or shattered into ice shards. At that time, these two girls would be in big trouble. Humph. Linley turned her head away and brushed her long hair that reached her waist. I'll let you off today, Claire Lucio. Next time, it won't be so easy. I should be the one saying that. Claire glared at Linley like an angry little wildcat. Linley Lauren Frost, next time, I'll definitely burn you to ashes. The two girls looked at each other, then both snorted coldly and turned their heads away. Seeing this scene, Noah couldn't help but laugh. Perhaps it was really as Carol said. Claire and Linley's relationship was quite good. That might be the case. Because Noah didn't need to attend classes, when Claire and Linley both went to class, he was still hiding in the library, looking for books related to the Holy Maiden and the Holy Sword. However, no matter which book it was, even if it mentioned the Holy Maiden and the Holy Sword, they were all written in the form of legends. There was no basis at all and it couldn't be completely believed. Thus, Noah stayed in the library for an entire day, but didn't gain anything at all. It wasn't until almost dusk that Noah walked out of the library. He raised his hand and stared at the elven engravings that looked like swords crisscrossing, forming an extremely complicated pattern. What's wrong with you? Naturally, no one would answer Noah's question. Noah could only give up. He lifted his feet and was about to walk out when the sound of hurried footsteps rang out. Wait! The male elven user over there. Upon hearing the voice, Noah subconsciously stopped in his tracks, turned his head, and looked in the direction of the voice. He saw Alice running in Noah's direction. After stopping, she immediately spoke while panting. It's good that you haven't left yet. What's wrong? Noah raised his eyebrows and said with a smile that wasn't a smile. Let's make it clear first, I'm not waiting for the sky to turn dark to hunt women. It's best that you're not. Alice glared at Noah before straightening her body. She coughed and stammered, You're right. I'm here to tell you about your residence. Oh. Noah's interest was slightly piqued. Then where am I staying? As soon as these words were spoken, Alice's beautiful face turned slightly red. She lowered her head and opened her mouth to speak in a mosquito's voice. My room, huh? Noah almost couldn't believe his ears. What did you say? Alice bit her lip and looked angrily at Noah as she shouted loudly. You're staying in my room. Noah was really confused. What kind of development was this? Chapter 956. As an academy that specialized in nurturing elven users, not only did the Elven Academy own a vast elven forest, but there were also teachers who were as strong as the Elven Knights of the Empire. There were 3 grades in the Elven Academy, and each grade had a different class. The Mole class was where the most outstanding students of each grade would study. The Crow class was the exact opposite. Everyone in the class was problematic. Alice was a good student in the Weasel class. It was worth mentioning that Claire and Linley were both students of the Crow class. Under such circumstances, the students of the Elven Academy lived in different dormitories according to their classes. Alice's room was naturally in the Mole class dormitory. Under Alice's lead, Noah walked into the dormitory of the Mole class, where only pure and clean girls lived. Furthermore, they were all outstanding students. Noah's expression was somewhat helpless. Why did things turn out like this? Is there something you're unhappy about? Alice's face was tense as she led the way, not letting Noah see her blushing face. I'm the one who should be the most unhappy, right? Then why did you let me stay in your room? Noah rolled his eyes. If you're unhappy, why don't you just leave me be? That won't do. Alice's answer was firm. Although you're a male elven user, we have the responsibility to take care of you as a student of the academy. We can't just watch you live in the wilderness or on a tree. But you don't have to live in the female dormitory, do you? Noah asked curiously. Didn't you warn me not to have any ideas about the female dormitory? That's true, but other than you, all the elven users are female. There's no reason to build a male dormitory just for you, right? Alice said without turning her head. And I don't have enough time to build a good house for you. The previous one took me 3 hours. That was my limit. I'm the leader of the Wind King Knights, and I have to patrol and go to school every day. There's nothing I can do about it. All right. Noah rubbed his eyes. Then why stay in your room? If I let you stay in a room alone, with no one watching over you, who knows if you will sneak into the dormitory students' rooms to do something when they are asleep? Alice pouted. And the other students definitely won't be willing to live with you. Plus, there has to be someone watching over you. Other than me, is there a better candidate? Noah really wanted to tell Alice that if she let him live alone, he wouldn't do anything. However, as the only physically and mentally healthy male in an academy full of pure and innocent young girls, if he were to say this, it was estimated that 99 out of 100 people would not believe him, and the remaining one would only be half convinced. At the thought of this, Noah felt weak all over. Why don't you just let me continue living outside? I already said that I will not allow the students of the academy to fall into such dire straits, Alice said in an unquestionable tone. Or do you think I'm that kind of person? No, I know that you are a serious person. Noah laughed bitterly. However, at this time, being rigid is not a good thing. As they spoke, Noah and Alice arrived at the second floor of the mole dormitory and came to a door. Standing in front of the door, Alice placed one hand on the doorknob, but did not open the door for a long time. Instead, she turned her head uneasily and looked at Noah. I'll say this first. Letting you stay here is only because there has to be someone watching over you. There's no other meaning. Noah scratched his face and asked carefully. What are you trying to say? I mean, this is something that can't be helped. Alice looked up at Noah with a pair of watery eyes, her heart swaying with shyness. I'm definitely not the kind of woman who would casually invite a man into her room. Hearing this, Noah was slightly taken aback, then laughed. Oh. Alice was flustered. You. What are you laughing at? Nothing. Noah shrugged. It's just that I feel that you don't have to worry. Although I haven't known you for a long time, and we haven't interacted much, I already know how serious you are. I don't think that you're that kind of woman. That's good. Alice heaved a sigh of relief. Seeing this, Noah sighed in his heart. The leader of the night troop looked so strict on the surface, but in reality, she was just an ordinary and cute girl. As a pure girl who had never been so close to a male stranger, it was natural for her to be concerned about how the opposite sex looked at her. Especially for a serious girl like Alice, she was even more concerned about her image in the eyes of others. It had to be said that this Alice was really quite cute. Gotcha. Alice opened the door to her room with a soft creak. Her voice was a little nervous as she spoke in a mosquito-like voice. Come in. Seeing how nervous Alice was, Noah found it funny and walked into the room. What entered Noah's eyes was an unexpected room. The floor was pink. The home arranged in the room has a table and chair for dining and a table and chair for rest. In addition, there were decorative murals hanging on the walls. There were potted plants in the corner, and there were even a few dolls on a bench. It looked quite girlish. There were also 4 rooms in the room. One was a kitchen without a door. The other was a bathroom connected to the washroom. There were also 2 rooms side by side, and the doors were tightly shut. Those should be the rooms that the people who lived here used to sleep. The student dorms in Alicia Elven Academy were all 2-person dorms. This meant that Alice also had her own roommate. After leading Noah into the room, Alice said to Noah, "My roommate has temporarily left the academy to carry out a mission. He will only be back in a few weeks. I am unable to arrange a specific residence for you at the moment. However, I will propose some plans to the dean. I hope that your problem can be solved before my roommate returns." Noah nodded unconcernedly and continued to look around, admiring Alice's room bit by bit. Seeing how seriously Noah was looking at her room, Alice became shy. Don't keep staring. There's nothing strange, no." Noah laughed out loud. "It's just that I thought your room would be very simple. I didn't expect it to have the scent of a girl." Scent. Alice was shocked. She subconsciously placed her hand on her sword and spoke with a red face. You actually intend to smell me in my room? Beast! Please, can you at least not choose other words to listen to?" Noah felt a headache coming on. "I'm starting to doubt if you can really lead a team of knights like this. I'm also starting to doubt if bringing you to my room was a good choice." Alice glared at Noah, her face still a little hot. "In any case, you can make your own arrangements here. However, you are not allowed to enter my room." After saying that, Alice was just about to turn around when she seemed to have thought of something. She turned back and looked at Noah. "By the way, if you don't want to die, it's best that you don't enter my roommate's room." After saying that, Alice hid in her room in a panic. With a bang, she slammed the door shut. Noah could only look on helplessly. All of a sudden, Noah felt a line of sight coming straight from the window and falling on him. Noah reflexively turned his head and looked out of the window. There was only a building with the moon as the background. Noah frowned slightly. Was it an illusion? Under the dark moonlight, a girl with black wings on her back floated in the air. She looked down at the dormitory of the mole class and smiled sweetly. "Your senses are so sharp. If I looked for one more second, I would definitely be discovered." Saying this, the young girl put her finger between her lips and smiled happily. "Let me play with you then." You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.